It's the 27th day of December, 2015. Next time I'm going to say 2016. I've been looking forward to that this whole time. And this is the Radical Agnostic Central Tucson's best agnostic-themed podcast, broadcasted from my apartment.
Hands down.
My name is John.
This apartment's best podcast.
This apartment's finest content. My name is John. I'm your host. My co-host is Eddie West.
Wait, I get to be co-host?
I don't know. So you got to figure something out. We got the stowaway guest, Bryan Richter, everybody.
Howdy.
And I'm very pleased to present, for our second time, Greg Prill.
Hi, guys.
Repeat offender. I missed the first one. I think I was hiking, right?
Yeah, all the way from Portland, Oregon.
I thought you were in Bisbee.
Yeah. He moves around, baby.
Definitely took a step up.
I'm all over the place.
Yeah. We had a great, I think it was episode 4 when Greg was first on. It was a lot of fun. We talked about our forays into the paranormal and supernatural.
Yeah, the only way Greg sees Bisbee now is through remote viewing.
And it's better that way.
Much.
Yeah. And of course, we have the resident skeptic, Eddie West, here to temper our excitement with logic and reason.
Captain Killjoy.
I like that.
We got a great show, lots of stuff to talk about. Going to try to plow through 90 minutes, one part, and we'll see how that goes. There's going to be a dense part in here, guys, where I summarize an interesting lecture by Noam Chomsky. Believe me, it's more fun than that sounds. Where we're going to talk a little bit about
I'm skeptical.
the history of science and Western civilization, and just some cool little implications of that, of his thesis there. So, first few little notes. What is this? This is episode 42, by the way.
Secret to life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah, we are going to get there. Honestly, guys, the topics discussed here today are going to be perhaps about the most important things in life besides friends and family. So I hope to get really deep, and but also make it understandable. I these are complex topics. I have to dumb them down for myself, and then you guys get to benefit from that because I get to end of that sentence. So first few little things. Oh, Eddie West has a collection of short stories, and I meant to read more of them before today, but I got all caught up, so I had to find a really short one, and it was a third one called Hertz. And
Did you like that one?
It was awesome, man.
That's the cover. The cover that my wife drew is based on that story. Actually,
really,
it's her favorite in the collection.
I wouldn't know how to I've only read 2 of them. Characterize the sort of themes or what genre you're writing is, but it's kind of fantasy, sci-fi, but always with a heavy philosophical undertone. There's a point being made there, but all the writing chops are top quality. The dialogue flows. It's interesting. It's not too long. It's not overly loquacious. So that story was a lot of fun, guys. So I'm 2 for 2 with Eddie's short stories. They're both awesome so far. So what's the name of your book collection?
Matchmakers and Other Stories, and you can find it on the Amazon store if you look. It's a Kindle book. So
awesome! I just got one of those $50 Kindle Fires for Christmas.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's great. Those little machines are nice, dude. Very reasonable price too. So we have to talk, as promised last week, Star Wars episode. Was it 8? 7?
How dare you?
The Force Awakens, and then promptly falls to sleep.
I've seen it twice now.
Yeah,
but don't tell my in-laws.
My look, I was a little disappointed, and that comes from a few places. This is kind of a broad spoiler, so hit pause or whatever. But it basically 100% mimics the plot of the first Star Wars, with a couple other scenes from the other 2 original movies thrown in there as well. But the similarities.
Yeah, so don't worry about spoilers, because if you saw episode 4, you've seen episode 7.
But hold on.
Okay.
If you've read Beowulf, you've seen A New Hope.
Right. You're saying
mean-
these themes are...
Most people haven't
No,
read
at-
Beowulf. Like,
By the
a
way,
lot of
good
people
story,
have fucking
though.
seen episode 4.
You should read Beowulf. It's a good story.
It's
No,
a great story,
like,
but most people haven't read it.
Lucas was super duper into Campbell, both Joseph W. Campbell, a writer, and one of the things he's most famous for now, though, if I recollect, I think he also edited one of my favorite magazines, the Fantasy and Science Fiction. But he also wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
Right.
And he, in subsequent printings, Luke Skywalker's on the cover. So the copy I have has Luke Skywalker on the cover. But if I recollect, the book came out before A New Hope, and the whole point,
certainly, yeah.
And the whole point is that he, there is a certain basic story, and especially when you're trying to tell an epic story, you're going to open with the same basic idea. You could,
But Eddie...
Are you really going to give it that big of a
It's
pass,
not
man?
true. For example, it's not true that other sci-fi movies greatly resemble Star Wars: A New
The Matrix
Hope.
does.
Not in the sense of a confrontation between father and son on a long catwalk, a large weapon that's very very round that can be destroyed by.
Those are distinctly plot
spoilers.
beats.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Those are big plot. I mean, certainly those are mimicking plot beats. But you look at fucking The Matrix, and it hits all the same thematic beats.
Okay,
But it's dude, literally, it's the same movie.
it's
It's
the
the
same
same
course of
movie.
events.
Who's Ben Kenobi?
It's the same solution to the same problem in every
Who's
case.
Ben Kenobi?
They are you telling me that the way it shakes down, it doesn't?
Oh, it's
it
incredibly
shakes
similar.
Down, it's the same. When you say incredibly similar, what he means, ladies and gentlemen, is it's the same.
'Cause Eddie-
you can't get spoilers.
Is
You've
it
seen it
more
already.
similar to The New Hope than other movies are?
It's being as it's identical. I'm
Well,
gonna
it's also
answer.
set in the same world.
Right.
So, I mean,
So that's fine.
He's got lightsabers, too.
Here's my complaint, because people are going to listen to this and they're going to be like, "Oh, hated it." I had a good time.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the movie. I thought it was fun. But what I also thought was that you like had a chance with a willing audience to go next level.
Yeah.
You could have done something.
I don't
big,
know
man.
if I believe the audience was willing.
You could.
No, well, that's a good point. See, people were so... Here's what I wanted from the movie, and it wouldn't have made a 1/10 of the money if they had gone this route. I wanted like a side story on one of those crazy planets, and more than one planet. You have to have a lot of stuff
Well, in
going
Star
on
Wars,
in a Star Wars movie.
every planet has one town.
Yeah. And there was basically a ripoff of Mos Eisley Cantina. Every beat was just... And the...
At first, I thought he was just kind of like giving a tribute to
Right,
the original,
right.
and I'm like, no,
it went from
just
homage
doing it.
to facsimile.
Yeah.
And that's... But what do you think, Greg?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with that point, with it being the same as A New Hope. My impression while watching the movie was, I was probably 80% through, and like, this is still okay, this is still good, this is still good. But then by the time it ended, it's just like it never really delivered.
Yeah.
I just felt kind of disappointed. And I think one of the other big differences, even with it in A New Hope, was that when you're watching A New Hope, you had this sense that there was this vast universe out there.
Right.
You didn't know a lot about it. The Empire had this one weapon, but there was all kinds of other stuff happening in the Empire. And in this movie, everything was just tied up together.
The politics
on
of this
screen.
movie make no goddamn sense.
that's another
Right.
thing.
That was
That's-
the big problem with the way
Not
they
that the
did
prequels
Republic.
it made any sense, but like in the original three, or the good ones,
Yeah.
you had the Empire. That's a simple fucking concept. You can tell me there's an
empire.
empire,
Right.
I get it.
Roman
right?
Empire.
There's,
Got it.
there's
And
rebels.
those are the
I get
Empire.
that, right?
Yeah.
In the prequels, the politics made it like they were similar to certain things, but like if you really break it down, it made no goddamn sense. He was just trying to mimic the rise and fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And he did a very bad job of it. But then when you get to the new one, like I like the movie, and I defend it against it's too similar to The New Hope, because I hear that I feel like almost a little too often.
Well,
but I get it. No,
Not
I get
maybe
You might
because
just have
it's
to
true.
take that
Yeah.
one, bro. Like, you might just have to acquiesce.
I'll send
and
you
be
an
like,
article
yeah, you're right.
where they go through every...
It's
and
very
it-
similar,
yeah.
but I would argue that a lot of the time you're going to do it, and so then the question is just then going to be how much homage do I do? Do I start it on a desert planet?
Right.
Because if they start it on a snow planet, because this is Star Wars, and
The
every planet has
wide-angle
one
shot
thing.
of her speeder craft.
Right.
That's
the
Luke's...
droid with something
agree.
important
I agree.
wandering
With something
alone
I mean,
on the planet.
come
Jesus
on.
Christ, man.
It's certainly better in the prequels.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I ranked it fourth.
They were
It
terrible.
has made me hopeful. Like, it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a terrible movie. I get a little frustrated that when people say it's too similar, but I agree it's similar. Like,
Well,
we're not going to disagree that it's very, very
here's
similar.
why I'm hopeful, because Empire was the best one. It was dark. It was good. And this one will be, the next one should be that. So
Yeah.
this will be the best one out of the next three.
The way I saw it,
Back to fucking Ewoks for episode 9.
an optimistic outlook on this is that this movie maybe will be seen as an extended trailer sort of for the next 2 movies.
Let's hope. Because
Yeah.
I really thought like they were going to do something really big and next level.
They just had to not
And
fuck it up.
here's my
even
other complaint, and maybe you guys will get this. Vader was like this. Cold, calculating supervillain,
this
and you got
villain is-
Kylo Ren, who's like a tantruming little 4-year-old.
Actually, you know what?
Just like in the prequels,
In the young
they made
Anakin,
Darth
yeah,
Vader.
they, like, melded him.
sacriléged
They
his
like
character.
melded him. They made him look like Darth Vader, but act like
He's a
young Anakin.
whiny little bitch, and of course,
I agree.
Not only can the
I
female
like that
who
to
has
some
the
extent.
Force, not only can she, the first time she picks
Already
up a lightsaber,
whip his ass.
Not only can she,
He
do
got
that,
shot. Shoot me and see how well I fight.
He's a Sith guy. He's trained
his
in
ass
swordsmanship.
whooped by a
She's
chick
never
who's never
touched this
picked up
weapon.
a lightsaber.
But not only that, the ex-stormtrooper who has no Force also almost beats him with the lightsaber.
Yeah, that's the thing. If this is
He's the weak ass villain if I ever seen one.
God.
Man.
Have you guys read the emo Kylo Ren Twitter feed?
I heard
No,
about
but
that.
God,
It
it's
is
gotta be
fucking hilarious. It's like, no, Mom, it's not just a phase. This is who I am now.
Go ahead, Eddie or Greg.
Yeah, if this is an extended trailer, then what is it? What are you curious about? Because I'm not really curious about anything.
I don't care. When I left, I was
know,
like, I can't wait for the Revenant.
That-
Yeah, a different movie.
That big,
it's too generous. You're right. I mean, I'm like, sorry. And it's the weird thing was that the special effects at times were spectacular, and then at other times were underwhelming. Things didn't
like
look.
what?
Environments like on the desert planet looked very real, very cool. But other times, like in the forest, it looked like a cartoon. It wasn't done well. It wasn't done as well as movies with half the budget can do those.
It
Or
wasn't
certain
done
ones-
as well as the video game.
Yeah.
Actually, in some of the
Yeah.
environments, I don't know if any of you have played that.
really
but-
looked cartoony. You didn't feel like you were there. There were no little creatures, running past and stuff. And
They could have went a little more Avatar.
yeah,
I like to think if I ignored the existence of the prequels, this one would have been maybe a little of a disappointment. I had trouble when I was on the show last time. I liked it, but I just seen it the first time, and it definitely astounds. Like it has a certain impressive visual aesthetic.
Yeah.
And I've now seen it twice, and I'm not really backing away from that per se, because like when you talk about like, oh, is it better than New Hope? Well, you got to contrast the fact that if you take them both like separately. Well, New Hope is older, and you've got a problem with that. But on the flip side, they're very similar, and you've got to take that into account. Well, it's a little less original because the New Hope's right there,
Yeah.
So it's a tough balance. It's certainly better than the prequels, though. So like if the prequels never happened and this happened, I would have been like,
I just don't have enough life left to care about movies that are better than horrible movies, but not very good. You know what I mean? That's how I'm coming at it, man. It's just I'm done with it. And it was you can call it. It's a space opera, so it can be a little cheesy and get away with that, and that's okay. But I don't like space operas. I found like the music, that orchestra shit. I was done with it immediately. I didn't even like when the Star Wars thing came on the
You want
screen
some
at the
Beastie
beginning.
Boys?
I wanted something different or interesting. I don't know. And the acting, I was very underwhelmed. The John Boyega, the Black Stormtrooper guy, easily best performance in the movie, and I was done with everyone else. Harrison Ford looked like he was senile.
Well,
He
yeah.
couldn't get an act.
He looked bored.
Yeah. Carrie Fisher,
Carrie
just
Fisher was
nonsense.
flat.
Chewbacca even sucked.
bite your tongue.
I like the little droid, though.
I actually had
BB-8
trouble with
was
John
cool.
Boyega just because I need to know more about how these stormtroopers work.
Yeah.
Because like, was his acting job cool? No, he did a great. But like, I struggle with like, well, they're supposed to be like brainwashed, but he's
Yeah,
all
yeah.
like, "Whoa, bro!" Well, no.
He just
Wait,
has a change
wait,
of
no,
heart.
he doesn't say "whoa, bro." Wait, hold on.
Racist.
The internet made me accidentally racist a long time ago with
Yeah.
Will Smith with that whole "Welcome to Earth" thing.
Earth.
Because he does not say Earth.
No.
He says Earth very clearly, and I felt like an asshole because of the meme. So no, he doesn't say like "whoa, bro." He says, but he's very like, "Whoa, man, what's going on?"
Yeah.
You know, like he's very quick. "Oh, I'm Finn now. Yeah, hey, good to see."
Yeah.
If you were a brainwashed stormtrooper, I struggle with
It's
that.
so
Like,
silly.
I like his character.
I love how him and the female and Harrison Ford
the female.
come into a planet-sized facility. Oh no, him, Harrison Ford, and whoever else, I don't know who was with them, came to a planet-sized facility,
Chewie?
instantly find the woman they're looking for, crawling across the way
But it's
from
the
them.
Force. The Force makes every coincidence just easy.
Oh, okay.
Well, no, but that's always been a problem with Star Wars. Everything is tinier than it comes
Boom.
across.
Greg can mic drop right there.
All of
He's like,
Tatooine is fucking Mos Eisley and huts. And all of fucking Coruscant
and
is
that's
like
what was
3
missing.
alleys.
There
and
needed
the
to be
Senate
a
chambers.
hut in that movie. If there was a hut, I would have
I
liked
said that
it.
almost right away, right? We needed a hut.
Yeah.
Like we were missing a hut.
I got a great recommendation. Anyone who likes fantasy novels, King Killer Chronicle is a 3-part series by Patrick Rothfuss, and I finished the first one and started the second one yesterday, and they're awesome, guys. If you like Lord of the Rings, if you like Game of Thrones, not that I've read Game of Thrones, but if you like those things, this is top tier fantasy, guys. So I really recommend if you're looking for an awesome universe to go into with a cool system of magic that is bound by principles. Like they can do magic like bindings and sigildry and stuff, but there's like the law of conservation of energy is still there. If you use basically your powers to make a candle light, that heat has to come from somewhere, and you can either use a heat source of your own or you can use your own body heat, which is in the book very dangerous because you're draining your body heat. So I like that. I like there's like a technical structure to these powers and everything, and very clear limits to what they can do. But it's really also very emotional and very, it's just great characters, guys. I really recommend it.
I could be an asshole about fantasy often. I could be very condescending and not the biggest fan. So if I say something good is in fantasy, that's probably relatively unlikely to happen, especially with like the high medieval style fantasy. That said, my best friend Dove reads all the damn fantasy and has a very nuanced view of it, and he said the same thing. He said, "Oh my god, this is my favorite thing ever."
It's awesome.
He was a little disappointed by the second one.
Really?
Yeah, but
Well,
he loves the first one so much. He's like, he's got like 10 books stored of shit before I get upset. So
I'm 150 pages into the second one, and I found
could be
there were
misremembering,
jokes in there that I was laughing while I was sitting there reading. Like that's pretty rare, So far it's pretty good, but yeah.
Yeah, I should probably read that then because it's been a
Dude.
long time since I read a book that made me laugh, brother.
Yeah.
And he loved the structure
A
because
real
the
long
basic
time.
structure of it, which you didn't talk about much, is it's a story being told, which is
Yeah.
I think is cool.
Yeah, it's a
As someone who
right.
writes, I like
it's
that
it's
conceit.
only over the course of 3 days as this hero from the past is relating his story to a scribe, and so the content of the books is him telling the story, but something in the present is also going on, which is really crazy. So there's two.
I'm a sucker for framing narratives.
Yeah.
I just like a good book.
Yeah.
I'm simple, man. I'm so simple. I think the simpler I get, the happier I get. Which is
Before we
kinda
get
weird
to
'cause
the,
I'm not a super happy guy.
Before we get to the main meat of this, and also an anger management with Bryan, I read an interesting long article about a crime that happened in Washington, I think, and
State?
Washington State, and what it was this foster girl. This girl had grown up in the foster system. She was 17 years old. She called the cops and reported that a stranger had broken into her house and tied her up and raped her. And then he said some stuff or whatever and left. And so first the cops were looking for the guy, and they couldn't find any evidence. The guy had been real careful, apparently. And it was kind of a dead end. And then her two of her foster mothers, who she had become very close to, related that when they talked to her about it, the next day or whatever, she was just like totally straight faced, and they were very surprised by the way she was dealing with it. Like she was just in a good mood, wanted to go out shopping, stuff like that. And they were like, this is weird. I have a weird feeling about this. Both of them separately came to that conclusion. And so they brought her in a couple of months later, and the case was not progressing. They were not finding the perpetrator. And there were some inconsistencies in her story. I'm not sure exactly what they were, but it was something she said about the first time about you woke me up or this or that. She didn't say the next time, and the detective was very skeptical, and he came to the conclusion that she wasn't telling the truth. So he took her into the the interrogation room, and he told her, you do know what the penalty is for filing a false police report? You could go to jail for a year. Your foster benefits could be taken away, whatever you're getting from the government, all this stuff. And he said, and she started saying, well, maybe I dreamed it. Maybe it was just a dream. And he's like, and then he hammered her a little more on the details. And then eventually she came to the conclusion. She's like, no, all right. She's like, you got me. I made it all up. I wanted attention or something or other. I can't remember what her excuse was. And so I don't think they fined her $500, I think, is what happened. And then they, set her free.
And it goes on her record. And I think she was in jail for a couple days.
Yeah, I think you're right. And she did a signed confession, said, I'm sorry, I made it up. And so meanwhile, there's these female detectives in another state, I believe, who are, I think it's Colorado, who are investigating a serial rapist. And the article's great. They go through the detective process, how they find this evidence, and it's really amazing how they piece these things together. And so they come and they bust this guy, and ex-soldier, and just really brutal dude, and it was all very calculated. He was just going from house to house, a lot of older ladies, and tying them up, and then he would apologize afterwards and stuff. And so they finally find this guy and catch him, and they get into his closet and they find his, he kept records of everything, and they find his phone,
pictures, not
pictures
just...
and documents. And she's flipping through, and she finds a picture of this young girl that wasn't on their roster. There wasn't a crime they were investigating, and turns out to be the girl in Washington.
It was a picture of her driver's license. So, it wasn't even like we had to find this
woman. A picture of her
woman
naked on the bed with her driver's license on her chest, because he would blackmail them by saying, if you tell anyone, I'm going to release these to the internet, and your kids will see them and everything. It's whatever.
Because he's a fucking monster.
Yeah. So then they find this. They connect the identity of the girl, obviously, because the license is there. And she had been telling the truth the whole time. And it's...
And one of the worst parts about that, I believe that she was one of either actually or very close to one of his first victims.
Yes.
If they had believed her,
you're right.
All the ones that eventually did get him caught wouldn't have happened.
Well,
that's not fair.
Him.
Yeah,
It's a very important point, and it's just, it shows you that these confessions, and I don't know if you guys know, but it's legal for police to lie to people in an interrogation. They are allowed to say, Bryan, your buddy Tom, he flipped on you already. You're going away.
Or we found evidence.
Yeah, we found evidence. They can do that. There's Supreme Court cases over the last decades, and that has been decided.
That's why you exercise your right to counsel.
Yeah.
Whoa. You were going a different way with that, and I was like, that's a bad idea. No. Do not go that way.
Yeah. You exercise your right to counsel because they can access Amendment. All that information.
You're right not to say anything.
Yeah. I don't give a fuck what Uncle Tom said.
Right.
I'm going to just go ahead and keep quiet, and you can talk to my lawyer, and he'll find out exactly what evidence you have and don't have.
And for us in the public witnessing, high profile cases, when you hear they signed a confession, you're thinking, look, the justice system's a little screwy, but you have rights. No one's going to confess to something they didn't do.
That's very hard for people to believe. It's very hard for people to believe who aren't in a circumstance where then they do it, because we know, we know it happens all. Here's an obvious example where clearly it really did happen. So clearly that confession is false,
right?
And it's really hard to get through to people. It's kind of like,
it's not like he was holding a gun to her head or anything. And so, and she came to that, and she might have believed it herself. She probably did believe that she had made it up or had dreamed it. By the time she wrote it down and signed it, she probably had stopped trusting herself.
And how fucked up is that going to make you?
Yeah.
Even more so. You already got fucked up by being abused and fucking raped. And then, sorry, and I apologize. I tried to curse too much, but Jesus Christ.
No, if ever there's a time that deserves it. It was just, it was some shocking stuff.
And I struggle.
So where's that sweetheart now? Where's that dude?
Well, he's in jail.
Serving at least 327 years.
327 and a half.
Colorado?
Part of me hopes.
I think so, yeah.
And this is... I struggle with principles on this because, of course, the justice system serves its purpose, and extrajudicial punishment is not necessarily something one should hope for.
I hope
but
he's
I
getting
wouldn't
some
be
street
sad
justice.
if he wound up not serving the full of his sentence because somebody shanked him in prison. Like, I wouldn't be like, oh, that's unfortunate.
I just hope he's getting shanked in prison. I hope he's getting some street justice, and I mean back street justice.
You know what sucks though is, unfortunately, I don't know that he will, because it's not. It's only kids are the really one that that.
I don't know about that. I thought rapists were treated fairly roughly, and my thesis on that was, I think there's like this.
Everybody's got a mama.
Yeah,
A lot of dudes got sisters.
true. But I also
And
think
daughters.
my suspicion is, and I don't know anything about this, so but my suspicion is the inmates are kind of looking for an excuse to beat the shit out of someone and feel justified in doing so because they got a lot of pent up anger. You're locked in a cage. You're not a happy dude.
And I'm not going to feel sorry for the dude who did that. Who's getting
It's a victimless crime. It's like punching a Nazi in the
Thank you.
face.
It's a victimless crime. Yep, go out and punch a Nazi.
Yeah.
There's a great episode about
Good for
Doctor
the world.
Who
Good for
about-
your soul.
Yeah.
There's a great episode in Doctor Who about somebody about a whole group time traveling and then kidnapping horrible people so that they can make them suffer, and then replacing them with a duplicate that dies right at their moment of death.
Yeah.
Best episode ever.
Nice.
Kidnapping Nazis, and then he gets tortured. I'm okay with that.
Would you? That was a philosophical question that was going around. Would you go back in time? If you could go back in time, would you kill baby Hitler? Would you, decapitate a little baby?
Speaking of which, did I do the anger management about the skinhead that I got in a fight with in Germany?
No.
That's the one you should do
God.
today.
That's today. I'm going to spare some details, but
That one is brutal. That's why there is such a thing as anger management with Bryan Richter.
yeah,
Oh boy!
this one's probably a 10 on the Richter scale.
All right, folks. So here
The
we
baby
go.
Hitler one is way less complicated than people like to make
I
out.
wouldn't kill him because he lost.
Taught the world a lesson, kind of.
Well, I mean, if you kill Hitler, then if Germany's prime for that type of leader, and you kill Hitler, then what's to say that the leader that rises to power wins?
Good point.
And
Could have
if you're
been
saying,
another
if you're saying,
maniac.
okay, so and if we're saying
We need
you're
to know a
killing
lot
Hitler
more.
to save the Jews, is that why we're doing it?
Right.
Okay, we could have
And
done
all the
that.
soldiers.
We could have bombed the rail lines.
No, well, the idea is
We
you're
could
a
have done
time
all
traveler.
that.
Yeah, but you can't.
We could when they tried to flee Germany,
Right, no, but
we
that's-
could have fucking taken them
Yeah, but-
instead of enacting legislation to keep them out.
Okay,
Brian
have you-
wants to bring in a
Brian,
corollary
Brian,
point
I feel
here.
like if someone ever told you about the trolley problem in philosophy, that you'd go, well, you could just design the trolley so that it could just stop.
Well,
Yeah,
I
just
don't
pick
know.
the-
I don't know about the trolley because I didn't study that, but I did study the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Right, but no, the idea of this is you Brian.
It's supposed
you
to
put in a
be,
box, you wake up, and it's
a
1930.
moral dilemma for an individual.
Well, yeah, it's supposed to be you wake up, it's 19. Well, actually, it wouldn't be
No,
1930. It would be
I get it.
1910. And you are just a guy, and you're only going to be
1880s,
here a
actually.
day. Was that when he was born?
He was in high school with Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein was born in 88, I think. So.
Okay, well,
Like
fine.
the same high school?
Yeah.
Oh,
They
wow.
were 1 year apart. Wittgenstein, of course, being a Jew, and Hitler being little Hitler.
Little head.
There's no evidence that they knew each other, and I'm sure Wittgenstein
the little
never
mustache.
talked to anyone in his life. So,
But,
I'm
so
sure
it's
he didn't know.
1888, and you're there for one day, Brian. You're there for one day. You don't get to be there to influence history with your knowledge. This is I'm here for one day. Do you or don't you kill Hitler? That's the question. You're like you appear in his bedroom. Maybe you're there for 5 minutes. You get to make the choice. And
Do
leave.
I, Brian Richter, kill a baby?
Because I'm not killing
I
any
need to
babies.
understand time better.
I'm not killing babies.
I would need to
Right.
understand.
Yeah, you can't predict. There's too many things you can't predict.
And this finally something I've always wanted to bring in, but it never has a place. I believe that if time travel was possible, right, and you could just some machine. Now you're back in 1888. I think it would have such an impact on your psyche that within 3 days you'd be dressing like that and applying for a job. You would be the memory of all of this would be there, and it would be very vivid and confusing. And if you didn't have a complete mental breakdown, you would just extremely rapidly adapt to that situation because you can imagine this all you want, but every day you're living in 1888. You have to go to the outhouse. You have to buy food within the first 24 hours. You're getting hungry. You know what I mean? I always thought if you went back, you would just very quickly adapt if you didn't completely explode from the paradox of it. But
because if you let him live, you never know. Maybe something goes different because you decided that. Maybe he gets into the Vienna art school and he doesn't feel like the Jews fucking kept him out of it.
If you're
maybe he remembers that Jewish guy who used to buy his little postcards and kept him eating during the days when he was starving and living at the youth hostel.
Bring him
Maybe
a
he
coloring
thinks about
book.
that guy. Yeah,
I would go buy him a coloring book.
You could. What you should do is you should say that you're Jehovah and that you're going to make sure that he lives through World War I.
the Jews.
And so after World War I, he converts to Judaism.
No. Here's what you do: you write down a list of prophecies over the next decade.
Yeah, so like there's other ways.
And you're like, hey, look, every year, every birthday, read this list and tell me, and just ask yourself, did this crazy guy's prophecies come true? And as they do, you'll have more trust in me. And at the end, there's the last one is don't kill Jews. That's the last thing on the paper.
The final solution needs to be wickedly reworked.
Yeah.
You're way off base, bro.
Also, don't have sex with hookers who gave you syphilis.
Did he have that?
He totally had syphilis.
They say that about everyone. They said that about Nietzsche too.
Yeah, but Nietzsche had syphilis.
Not necessarily. There's a very strong theory that he had a tumor behind his eye, which his father died from, by the way, and which can account for all kinds of the headaches, his migraines, and
but didn't he have the? Well, this is probably a discussion for another time. But I thought he had the physical symptoms, which you don't get sores from a tumor.
Oh, yeah, parts of you start rotting off if you have syphilis. I don't know if he did, because there's pictures of him from in the convalescence, and his face looks fine.
Do you ever hear of temporal lobe epilepsy?
No.
Temporal lobe epilepsy is it's a seizure disorder, and it can give you ecstatic visions. And so everybody wants to fucking diagnose anybody who ever had a vision with temporal lobe epilepsy.
Exactly.
From Philip K. Dick to fucking Thomas Aquinas, it's they probably temporal lobe epilepsy. Joan of Arc, temporal lobe epilepsy. There you go. And so it can be.
So let's move into our main topic of today. What we have is we have an interesting group here. I've been excited because Greg, if you guys had listened to episode 4. I don't want to misdescribe you. You're interested. You're exploring in the possibility of things that are not. I can't even.
Yeah, well, so on the first time I was on, we used the label Consciousness Explorer,
right?
And so I think that's a good label because
a psychonaut.
Yeah, well, psychonaut is often connected to drugs,
Video game?
which I don't use anymore, but and never very much. But as we're going to discuss, explorer is really the way I like to put it because I don't have a set in stone framework for any of this. I just have found that things happen with consciousness that are really interesting, and I found that they are explorable. And so yeah,
maybe some of them lie outside of things that are currently explained. In other words, we don't have explanations for a lot of this stuff. Which anyone would admit.
It certainly seems that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, would you say the approach that you and I talk about a lot is called open-minded skepticism? So it's kind of like this balance between everything that you come across in terms of beliefs or propositions. You have to be skeptical. You don't just swallow it whole. You have to say, well, maybe not, or are you being honest, or what's a counter argument for that? And then the open-minded part is not letting the skeptical part overtake everything to where you become the, poster boy for clear-headedness and mainstream science. The open-mindedness just allows more possibilities in, and if you can, it must be very delicate to walk that fence between skepticism and open-mindedness, but kind of walking that fence is sort of what the radical agnostic thing is all about. Right.
Yeah, I've had things happen to me. I mean, we maybe told some stories in the first show, and maybe we can go into a couple here if they're entertaining. But I've had quote unquote paranormal things happen to me that are extremely interesting, and I immediately want to put into a box and explain it. But I've as much as possible resisted that urge and tried to replicate them without even explaining why they're happening or what they mean, and saving that for later if it becomes clearer later.
That's interesting. Yeah. So not coloring an experience with any assumptions, on either side. It's not, well, this must have a physical explanation, and it's also not angels. You don't allow anyone to just spoon feed you a theory.
Right.
Eddie.
You called it open-minded skepticism, but I would actually argue that skepticism carries baggage that you guys don't lift. I think radical agnosticism or open-minded agnosticism would be great descriptors, because you guys, there's a lot of talk about whether agnosticism is separate from atheism and theism, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, etymologically speaking, it just means I don't know, without knowledge. Right?
Certainly.
Gnosis. Whereas skepticism implies, and actually I don't remember the root, so somebody can argue with me if they want, but I don't remember the root of skepticism. But to me, the baggage of skepticism is a certain degree of rejection, a certain degree of not 100% rejection, but just like, I don't buy what you're selling, right?
Yeah.
Whereas agnosticism it seems more almost, again, and I don't want to argue with you guys. You're not skeptics. I'm just saying, I feel you guys are both open-minded, and that's good. And neither one of you wants to say this is the way it is, and that's also very
so what
good.
you're saying is an agnostic is saying I don't know either way, and a skeptic is saying
No.
I don't know, but not that.
Yeah.
But probably
Rejection.
not that.
A little bit, yeah. I don't want to say that's
Well, I think that's
absolute,
pretty.
but yeah.
If that's what you're
very
saying,
close,
that's
yeah.
pretty accurate.
I would contend, though, that's where that's what skepticism has become, to the detriment of skeptics.
Skepticism has become cynicism, is the way I see it, and I'm actually trying to look up the root of the word skepticism right now, because I don't remember what it is.
Skepsos.
I don't remember what it is, but I know it's interesting.
Greek. It's got a Greek root.
I know,
It's definitely Greek.
I know it's interesting, and I know that it doesn't mean cynicism, and yet I think it's used.
It's become
Even
that way.
cynicism, actually, the root of cynicism. Anybody remember?
Cynics were Greek philosophers.
Uh-huh.
That's all.
What
I
is
got.
cynic? Dog. Diogenes of Sinope. He lived like a dog. The cynics were originally people who were just like, all this shit you guys are doing
Ascetics.
seems no.
Oh.
No. Not
Lived like a
ascetic.
dog?
Just I'm just gonna abandon all this shit. Diogenes was famous because he had a bowl. He had a tub. He walked around naked, and then he had a bowl.
Like
and he
this
saw
guy.
some kid holding cupping his hand to drink water. He's like, oh, apparently I don't need this fucking bowl. And he threw it away. He was just there's a little bit of assholery to it, but it's not asceticism per se. He would walk around the market masturbating because he was like, why should I care? Your social stuff, I don't give a shit, because what you guys are saying seems like nonsense to me.
I like his style.
Yeah, no, he's my favorite philosopher.
I know.
So skepsis in Greek, it means inquiry and doubt.
So the doubt is inherently there.
Yep.
You guys are much.
But we want to have we want automatic doubt. I mean, when someone tells me this crystal has these properties,
You doubt the
it.
claims, which is the agnosticism that I would argue. You don't say, well, yeah, you clearly know what you're talking about.
Right.
But you guys I don't know. I feel like skepticism,
Right.
both the baggage of the modern era and just the even etymologically, which well done, sir.
That's fair enough. Yeah, that's good. Good point. So Eddie representing skepticism, I would say. Bryan sort of floating somewhere in there. Me.
Brian's the straight man.
Yeah. Me. I'm the guy who.
What am I? I don't understand. I'm lost on
That's a
it.
comedic term. The straight man
man
in a thing, there's the goofy guy and then the straight man. What do you mean? I'm asking you who's on first.
Right.
I don't understand why.
I'm the straight man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
probably.
I'm a little bit to one side of Bryan, because I'm the guy who hasn't had any personal experiences of the supernatural, and yet I err on the side of supposing or presuming that things exist things that mainstream science would reject out of hand do in fact occur. It's a very light, weak claim, but that's where I'm coming from. Greg got more on the hand of first-hand experience, and that's where some of your, I wouldn't even call them beliefs, but your framework comes from. Do you want to give us an example of something crazy?
Right, and I'll say real quick too on the subject of doubt. I'll doubt other people's claims. But I just don't doubt my own experience, because I don't think that anyone can really go through life like that. Most people don't, and you wouldn't want to.
But can you explain a little further what you mean by doubting experience?
Well, so if I'm experimenting with remote viewing and I experience seeing a target correctly, I don't doubt that happened.
Right.
I can doubt all day long why it happens and what makes it happen, but it becomes
The fact remains that you saw it and you didn't know what the fuck it was before you saw it, but it's been seen and you can't unsee
Now,
it.
for example,
right, so where this comes in, because I don't know if we're actually even going to talk about some of these papers or studies of remote viewing, and there are some, but if we don't get to it, that's fine, because it doesn't really matter, because I can doubt all that stuff too. I can doubt if that happened. I wasn't there. But as soon as something happens to you, then you stop doubting that it happened, and then you're just left trying to find the explanation.
Framework to fit it into. Now, for example, and I think Eddie can still hear us, is the first time Greg and I tried to do a remote viewing thing, and one of the problems with this explanation is that I don't have all the exact details, and they actually are pretty important when we're trying to decide if this shit is real or not. But anyway, you'll just have to trust me, sort of. The first time we did it, it was Greg was in Bisbee, I was here, and we said, all right, let's put an object in a place in your apartment and sort of concentrate on it or whatever. And he would try to get into a meditative state and remote view the object, and then call me on the phone and tell me what he thinks, what his impressions are. What it was a red lighter. And he said he got the color red, and then he said it was about 3 inches long, this object. He said, he said for a fact 3 inches. So that's exactly what a lighter is. And that was about it. Didn't get anything else in terms of, didn't know it was a lighter, didn't say anything about fire. I don't know. But that was the first time we did it. So we were naturally very excited about that.
Right.
And similarly, when I tried it with Paula, because there's that whole myth of women's intuition and stuff, and she's a lot of I don't know, but I figured she'd be good at it. So she meditated for a half hour, and I put my .38, my pistol, on a pillow in the bed. She was in the other room at my old apartment, and thank you, Eddie, and I just said, concentrate on it, tell me what you see. And first word she said was gun. So got that one. Then I did a pencil. The second time said pen. And these were random objects in the room that I had placed there. Now after that, got a bunch wrong. And then we only did like 8 or 9. That was it. Same with Greg and I. We had that initial success, and then we did 50 trials over the days. And we used a slightly more experimental setup where I would send him I would pick the object using a coin flip, and then I would send him 4 pictures of objects, and one of those was it. And so, but before that, he would get his impressions and write them down. Then I would send him the 4 pictures. That way we knew there was a 25% chance that he would randomly get it right. So over the 50 trials, we wanted to see if it was more than 25% what we got. And there was some, we were both doing it with each other. And there were some really astounding successes in there where it was like, really got the object like dead on, but it turned out to be 25%, just baseline random chance. So that experiment didn't produce any interesting results. But what is interesting is what Greg was saying about when you do get it right, it is very, compelling. Now that could easily be cognitive dissonance. That could easily just be, every time you randomly get it right, it's going to be astounding.
It's a pretty random thing to get right, though. I mean, it's really a random thing to get right. Of all the stuff in your house that you could put out, for him to pick just randomly a lighter.
I mean, he didn't get lighter. Right? He did say red, and he got the size of the object correct.
Or even for anything in the room, if you could have put anything on the pillow, for her to get gun, I mean...
Yeah, and pen, when it was a pencil.
That's pretty random. There's a lot of shit in my room I could put up there.
It's compelling. It's compelling to say the least. So,
and this kind of thing is where your initial attitude is really going to determine what happens in the long run. Because if you come into it super skeptical, maybe you only do 4, 8 trials, whatever, and you see that you just got a quarter of them, and that's chance level, and you just stop. But when you have those compelling things happen, of course you shouldn't immediately jump to, well, it's real, I proved it. But it's motivated me to continue, and to the point where after I did the experiment with John, there's been a few times where it's just so insanely impossible that it's huge evidence for me. A good example was I started doing it with another friend, and we loosened the controls because we were like, well, we're just experimenting, like whatever. We don't even care about statistics. So we said you can look up any image on the internet and just save it to your hard drive and say the target selected, and then you start viewing it. Well, on like the 4th one, and we did get a few little touches of things like we were talking about on some of the first targets. So we kept going, and like on like the 4th or 5th target, I knew he had the target selected, and I was doing other stuff that day. And then all of a sudden I was like, I didn't really think about what his target was yet. And immediately this extremely vivid picture, like abnormally vivid for just a daydreamer thinking about something, of riding a bicycle through New York City with all the tall buildings around, past a bright yellow taxi cab flashed into my mind and just stood there. I was like, well, I guess that's it. And I don't really know why that happened. And so that turned out to be exactly the image he selected from the internet. Out of any image in the entire internet.
Right. Now,
that's pretty trippy.
Darren Brown tells a story. Darren Brown's a great British mentalist, magician, and skeptic, atheist. And he tells a story of this like electrical contractor, right? And he, man, what was it? So he gets a call out to this random light, power line in some rural area, and he goes out to the call, and he is working on the thing, the electric stuff, and then he hears the phone ringing from a phone box, one of those random emergency phones on the sides of roads. And the phone's ringing, and he's like, what the hell? So he walks over, as anyone would, and picks it up. And it's his secretary. And she says, hey, I just want to let you know such and such canceled his appointment or whatever. And the electrician is like, how did you get this number? And she goes, what do you mean? I just called your house phone. And he's like, no, you didn't, because I'm not at my house. And she looks down and she goes, oh no. She goes, I had typed in your social security number instead of your phone. I was reading the wrong number. And the number, whatever wrong number on the paper she had been reading, was the phone number for the phone box that he was at. And Darren Brown uses that as an example of coincidence, because he's an atheist and a skeptic. And he's saying once in a while, a 1 in a trillion occurrence will occur. Specifically, 1 in a trillion times. And so he likes to give that example as a way to debunk and shoot down people like Greg.
Almost anything.
Right. Anything.
Really, almost anything.
Yeah.
Well, if you use that example, you can shoot down almost anything.
Well, but that's why when you're studying these things, though, like if you do the 4 items, you're looking for 50% or 75%, not 25%, because you're going to get statistical fluctuations. You're going to get a run of, 15 heads in a row. Precisely. But overall, you're going to get heads and tails. The fact that you got 15 heads in a row doesn't mean, oh my God, something weird's going on. It just means statistically something happened. It's like the birthday problem. I believe it's at like 29 people. The odds of 2 people having the same birthday are almost 100%. But that group doesn't seem big. You think, there's 365 days. How weird is that? Well, statistics sometimes, especially when you get into some of the intricacies of statistics, become counterintuitive.
Now, that's a good bridge into what I wanted to do today, was to cover this Chomsky lecture. He's talking about history of science, Western culture and science. And what he wants to argue is that there might be limits, hard limits to human cognition, human intellectual ability to understand things. And certain questions like what is consciousness or how is it produced and stuff like that, he is suggesting may be completely beyond our cognitive grasp to answer. Now that sounds a little bit pessimistic and almost kind of uninteresting, but he to make this point, he starts from the 1600s, okay? Galileo, he might have been in the 1500s too, Galileo. But the view back then was that humans have limitless explanatory power. These were the new scientists. After Descartes and thing, people started getting really excited about science, empirical science, investigating the world, figuring it out. And they were like, look, we can do this. We can figure anything out given enough time and manpower and experiments and stuff. And the big point of this was to rid the world of the occult, is what they call it, supernatural.
And then by this time, did they have like primitive microscopes and things like that? Was that already around?
Galileo,
I forget when the first one was.
He invented the telescope, so those lenses were starting to be in use.
I remember the first really good ones were later on, but I think there's really like small ones.
There are, 1600s. There's definitely some microscopes.
Yeah. Okay. They weren't very. They were real primitive.
Oh yeah, not too great, but I think they were at least 100 times. 500 times maybe.
Because they started realizing that there was a lot to look at.
Yeah, on the micro level.
Yeah.
Now, so once again, their motivation was to get rid of any kind of ghosts or bullshit from the world.
And it was determinism. the idea of
Okay. Yeah. And what Eddie's he's making an important point is that the idea of science that governed these geniuses was the mechanistic philosophy, or the mechanical philosophy, or materialist philosophy. And philosophy, of course, just meant science back then. So sometimes there's a use of those two words. But this mechanistic, mechanical thing, you could also call it the clockwork universe. And the idea was that everything operated like a machine, like a very complex machine. And all interaction of matter took place through contact. So for one thing to affect another thing, in some way they had to hit each other like two billiard balls on a pool table. That's the mechanistic clockwork universe philosophy, and that governed Galileo and Newton, and the whole worldview was based on that. Things are bumping into each other. That's all it is.
Well, they're not totally wrong.
No, they're not totally wrong, but they are totally wrong. And the thing is, like matter does what you're saying, Bryan, is correct. If I push this, action
are
and
always
reaction,
bumping into each other,
and it's worth noting that nothing has ever touched anything else.
Right? And they didn't know that either, because things don't actually collide. What we now know is that
I tell that to my body. It's collided with a lot of shit. They're definitely wrong about that.
So. And this was the time when these beautiful clocks...
Are you saying we're all virgins?
We are.
Holy shit. So you Muslims could end up with me, Greg, John, and Eddie waiting on you fellas. Good luck with that. You better have good hooks, man. You're not taking my back easy, buddy.
Eternal open mat.
Yeah, eternal open mat.
There's no timer.
Yeah, I'm actually down, bro. Maybe I'll be in good shape in the afterlife.
Little jiu-jitsu humor there. Oh, it was a rough one, I tell you.
That's what I want to talk about when I look at you guys.
And they also were building these amazing little automata, or these robots that could do, the guy that can play chess. He's this machine they built.
Although that had a midget in him.
Oh, well, a lot of them didn't.
Yeah.
And they had ones actually...
That makes it such
small
a
person,
better...
little
It's so
person,
much
dwarf.
better story than when he said there was a midget in it. I perked up. I'm like, wait. Every story's better with a midget.
All right, so... they built these cool creatures in the royal gardens. There was robots that if you tripped a certain mechanism, they would say words even, and somehow they got them to vocalize in some primitive, horrible, creepy way. But so that's the view of science they were going under. Well, to put it briefly, there can be no interaction without contact. So interaction without contact is what you could call action at a distance. And it was a concept that was believed to be absurd. It was impossible. You can't have action at a distance. Things have to knock into each other to make an interaction. Well, and here's an interesting side note about our cognition, right? Infants can recognize causality. Infant humans, when they see an effect, they naturally look for a cause, a physical cause. And they'll even invent a cause if one isn't present, right? So if you set up an experiment to where something happens sort of from an invisible force that makes it happen, like magnets or something, the infant baby human will look for a physical cause, and they've even found ways to show that the infant will make up a cause that wasn't really there to explain the interaction. So, and Chomsky, of course, believes in the universal grammar that we're born with certain concepts almost ingrained in our brains, which is a controversial theory. I don't know if I agree with it in terms of language. But
are you talking about instincts?
Yes, instincts, but are there intellectual instincts?
Like
almost.
To look for a cause when you see an effect.
Exactly. Cause and effect, causality is
because that's an instinct.
Yeah. But
like
it's
you see
also
something fall and nothing pushed it, you look to see if the wind's blowing leaves.
Right.
I like the thing he talked about with the triangle. That was kind of cool. Like he's saying, if you take just like a pencil and draw a triangle on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I didn't read it. I don't get heads up on content.
Your drawing might not be very good. It might not be perfect. But if you show that shape to a little kid who's learned his shapes, he's like, oh, it's a triangle.
Yeah, he knows what it is.
But it's you're automatically jumping to these
conclusions,
these set forms of things.
Similarly, if you show dots on a screen and the dots sort of, I know you guys can't see what I'm doing, but they propagate across the screen. The baby will assume that they'll see a solid object in motion,
which is how TV works.
Exactly. So this whole mechanistic philosophy that Galileo and all of these geniuses were working on is very much natural to us. This cause and effect, things bumping into each other. Now, the criteria for an intelligible scientific theory back then was very narrow. You had to show exactly how things worked according to physical contact and interactions between matter in order to make a hypothesis in science. Science was very more stringent than it is now in what it required from a theory or a hypothesis.
And to clarify that a little bit, it would be the idea of they wouldn't take just the math.
Were these guys all like disciples of Newton?
No, this
Galileo was before Newton.
This is
just before.
Yeah. Pre-Newton, when science was kind of first getting its bones.
Because he kind of really ran with that, right?
We're going to get to Newton, and that's the big turning point.
It was the idea of the difference between, in order to tell you that something falls at 32 feet per second, I would have to tell you why that is.
Right.
If I just tell you that something falls at 32 feet per second,
right.
You haven't given me a theory.
Yeah.
Your theory must tell me how and why this thing falls at 32 feet per second.
Yeah.
I'm not completely lost, which I'm happy about.
And the interesting thing is that's not now, today, in our time, that's not true anymore. You don't have to tell why to use that observation as a basis for further investigation. Now, and we're getting there. So we're moving right along through this, guys. So with Newton now, the discovery of gravitation, this mechanistic philosophy was shattered because what he discovered was action at a distance. Gravity, bodies in space have an attractive force on each other, no matter how big, how small, and they never touch. And
now, to be fair, though, the big problem was not so much that they didn't touch per se, because the big problem was there's no medium.
Nobody at this point had ever run into any magnetic substance?
No, they had, but they assumed that there was an invisible field, that there was
ether.
It wasn't ether for magnetism. Light was ether, but there was an idea.
Stones.
Go ahead.
There was an idea that all these things, but if we're talking about how something has to output to get that reaction, it's sort of like to spray. If I want to clean off my wall, I have to shoot the power sprayer, and then the water has to hit the wall.
Right,
it's not instant. It's not as soon as I have a power sprayer, the wall is clean.
Right.
So when Newton was saying that mathematically, the way the math works is all of this is instantaneous. If you shift the gravity, I don't pretend to have a good example of this, but basically the problem was that there was no way. The big problem of it was not that nothing touched, because they had an idea of invisible things. The wind is invisible, but they understood that the wind exists. But
they knew
magnetism,
but they also knew that it's particles of stuff.
Right. No, but what I'm saying
through
is
the air.
The idea
that's what pushes the leaf.
The idea of invisible things you can't see, like
invisible was
affecting
okay.
things
as
was
long
okay.
as you could give an explanation as to what there were
but
invisible things in there.
Gravity was the game changer.
A game changer.
Gravitons.
Yeah. Gravitons,
right.
Well, that's actually still a
Did we talk about this
thing,
before on the show?
The thing was,
bit.
it's not and I disagree somewhat with Chomsky, because he says that this idea of gravity destroyed materialism, and I would more argue that this idea of fuck you people, I'm just going to give you the math, and that's good enough, is what I don't think destroyed materialism. Because for many years there was this idea of gravitons. There was always this idea that there must be a field, there must be something there.
Right.
So he didn't wreck it just by saying it, but what he wrecked was this idea that you had to explain what you were talking about. And Chomsky talks about that in his talk.
You're absolutely right. What it was now that he found gravity, it was that, okay, there's gravity, fine, but everyone else was going to give you a theory as to what was really going on. In other words, there was ether that filled up all of space, and so when there was a body here, it moved the particles of ether, and that's what created the attraction. And so there were theories, and so if it had been accepted that there was no material between the two bodies in space, that would have shattered the mechanistic philosophy. But they were just saying, well, there must be, because that's the way
you use existing theories to postulate rather than investigate new.
Just like the infant
ideas.
Looks for the cause. The infant sees the effect and looks for the cause. This is what all the scientists of the day were doing. Because that's that cause and effect natural to our brains. So when we see the effect of gravity, fine, Newton's equations are right. He's right that this is how much a body will pull another body, but we're going to figure out someday and this is the big thing, someday we'll figure out what particles are being exchanged here, how things are actually bumping into each other without us invisibly.
Not yet.
Well, never.
Between relativity and Minkowski space-time, the idea is actually that it's not even particles, it's twisting. I mean, it gets really complicated.
No, that's the point. With Einstein, that quest went right into the 1800s to find. They still believed in the ether. They were working with different theories to explain how bodies in space were pulling on each other through the mechanistic philosophy. And that was finally destroyed for good with Einstein, because and this was the big loosening up of the intelligibility criteria, because he just fit it into physics. He changed physics so that now he used a metaphor. It bends space-time. An object in space bends space-time. And so there's like a dip, and it pulls objects through that dip, and so he just incorporated the fact of gravity with an equation that worked perfectly.
I want to pause you for a second.
He didn't tell you why. Well, I guess he did by saying space-time bends.
I want to pause you for a second.
All right.
Because Bryan is our audience surrogate. Do you understand what intelligibility is?
Yeah, I understand it.
Oh, that you understand all the mechanisms making it.
Yeah.
Do you know what space-time is? Because we throw these terms around, and sometimes I think they're worth explaining. If
I don't think. My opinion is that nobody understands what space. It's a metaphor.
It's defined by just being there.
Yeah, no, but the term space-time,
right? Okay,
is so. There's the 3 dimensions of space. Up, down, left, right, forward, back. Right.
Yep.
3 dimensions of temporal space. But we talked about temporal space, and so time as conceptually, and it's a metaphor, and etc. But as when we say time space, we're saying basically here's a 4-dimensional thing. The 4th dimension is time. So you should think of time just like you think of forward, back, up, down, left, and right. Yeah. So that's what time space is.
I think jiu-jitsu guys have a better understanding of that than most guys.
So
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I just do think sometimes we start to throw terms around, and sometimes they're universally known, and then sometimes you're like, wait, what does that actually fucking mean?
I wouldn't have explained it that clearly at all, because I don't.
Well, understand. Yeah, and I don't think I would have been able to give you it's more of a concept than I like an exact definition.
And the point is that Einstein, to make these equations work, he just fit the fact of gravitation into everything else, and then he came up with what Eddie was space-time. We'll call it that, and then we can calculate the dip, quote unquote, this dip in space-time, and that will show us how gravity can propagate at the speed of light but still be instantaneous over massive distances, which I still think is a very contentious idea. Because, well, anyway.
Wait, which part of that is contentious?
The speed of the propagation rate of gravitation is a contentious subject, but it's not for this, and So just to recap, Galileo insisted, and all those guys for hundreds of years, that for a scientific theory to be intelligible, it had to describe something that an artisan or an engineer could build, at least in theory. You have to describe how I could build a thing where the moon affects the tides. And that's why Galileo rejected the theories of the tides of the day. There were theories of the tides at his time that kind of were like gravity. They were saying, well, the moon's size is somehow pulling the water. And they were kind of right. But he was like, that's bullshit. That's ridiculous. There would need to be an exchange of particles. There would need to be a clockwork action here. And so he was, incorrectly rejected those theories. Christian Huygens, Leibniz both described Newton's theory of gravitation as an absurdity and as an occult theory. So like I said, their mission was to get the occult, which is this buzzword, which means bullshit, out of science. We want to be able to, anything in science has to be...
At the time it was a buzzword. Now it's a dog. It's 100% dog whistle now.
Yeah.
But I don't know if at the time. I think at the time the idea was, because occult comes from the idea of it's hidden. This idea of hidden variables. This idea of secret shit that we don't even comprehend.
Yeah.
Like no, it's particles and shit, and that's everything. So so I'm just, not to defend guys who were wrong, but
yeah. So, and Newton himself was unable to explain what caused gravity. He said he just gave it to God. He's like, God does it, because this doesn't make any sense according to what we know. It just doesn't make sense, but we know it works, because he came up with equations that could predict almost any motion in the solar system down to the second. He got messed up when Mercury came into play, but it's great Newtonian mechanics, amazing, worked for 500 years. If the four of us wanted to calculate something, we could still use Newtonian mechanics and it would work just fine. Just when you get to the very big or the very small or the very fast, it doesn't quite, it breaks down. So with Einstein and with Newton first and then with Einstein, these standards for an intelligible scientific theory were lowered, broadened, opened up. It was now, you could now just sort of say, well, I'll give you a framework in which all the facts make sense, and that'll be good enough. I don't have to show you how it all works.
It began to focus on just the math.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to tell you this is the way it is, and then I'm going to give you something that you can comprehend that works with that math, but that don't make it so.
Now,
like, bent space-time is usually described as like a trampoline. You know, a heavy thing is going to weigh down a trampoline, and then if you put anything near it, it's going to fall towards the heavy thing in the middle, right?
Yeah.
But we can't really conceptualize
Just a metaphor.
4D space-time.
Yeah,
it is
yeah.
just a metaphor. Now, all the math works for it, so we stick with it. But that we don't really, quote-unquote, know that space-time physically is bent. If there's some way, I don't know that we've come up with a good way to test that. I mean, we've just recently tested the holographic universe. We haven't ruled it out.
The light around the way light of a star goes around a planet, that's one of the proofs. And the way light behaves in black holes is also ways to verify Einstein's metaphor.
Ways to verify Einstein's metaphor. But the holographic universe, for example, is another metaphor that we've tested. And we think that actually, you know what? This metaphor may legit be false. Now, we haven't ruled it out for sure. We just did one test. One test is not sufficient. But
is that similar to the simulation theory?
There's a lot of crossover, and I'm a big fan of simulation theory, and there is definitely a huge amount of crossover. And I think the experiment Eddie's talking about, if you think of a metaphor that the universe is represented in a simulation, it has like a pixel size. The experiment was testing for a granularity of that pixel size, saying, "Oh, well, if stuff's made up of pixels. If you look at it things a certain way, you should see start to see the skipping of that or whatever."
But it's too small, right? Because the Planck length is supposed to be the pixel. Under the theory that Greg and I have been interested in from Tom Campbell, the Planck length is supposed to be the smallest length possible.
A quantum event is the thing that it always comes down to, and so
but that's separate than the pixelization, to use your thing. The Planck length is the literal smallest distance that we that we think exists.
Yeah.
We could be wrong, but we think it's the smallest thing that can be.
Which is a paradox, because shouldn't you be able to cut it in half, right? Any distance.
I don't know if it's
well, Zeno's paradox is involved in this, but go ahead.
Don't get me into discrete continuous language issues. But no, the jaggedness of the universe under a holographic model would be slightly greater than the Planck length. I actually don't know the size. Now, but that's not guaranteed. See, this experiment just failed to confirm. If they had found it, they'd be like, look, we expected to find this. We found it. So now we can be like, I don't think this is a metaphor. I think this is real. And they didn't find it, so maybe they're slightly off.
And I'm also not fully aware of why they're saying that the granularity would have to be bigger than a Planck length in that model. It's probably some specific model that I don't even know about. But like John said, in what we've read about, it might as well just be the Planck length.
Yeah. So again, that's why I was trying to be very careful to say it didn't rule it out,
which is far smaller, by the way, than any equipment we've ever built can see, quote unquote. Even any electron, it's orders. It's like 12 orders of magnitude smaller than anything we can even come close to seeing. So it can't be directly verified yet.
And even then, it wouldn't matter if you found something smaller, because you can always push it back.
Yeah. So here's where we are then. And the important thing here is that most people probably think that as science has progressed, it's gotten more precise. And in many ways it has, in terms of measuring things. Yes, the math has. But the standards for what counts as science now have in fact become very much more loosened, and for good reason. It's worked out great. Look at the wonders we have wrought. That was the right way to go. The mechanistic philosophy was wrong. It was incorrect.
Well, the need for intelligibility was wrong.
The belief about interaction and cause and effect, that all interaction needed contact, that was demonstrably wrong. We now know that particles interact with each other without contact, or even conditions of influence that we can describe.
Certainly in their relatively naive view of it. Yes, I agree completely. But I would argue that the bigger deal is the intelligibility question.
Yeah.
The issue of the mechanistic, because it could, you know what, we could find some secret mechanistic issue, and I wouldn't give a shit. Because I would give more of a shit about the fact that the math is more important than whether you tell me a complete picture that may wind up being wrong or that you're full of shit about.
Okay.
The important part is to give me stuff that works. After that, we can try to figure out some way to make us understand it, but give me math that works. That's the important part, not what story you want to tell me about that math.
Right. And that's, yeah. So we use empiricism now, to observing our environment, to state what does happen. And then we use theories to describe how that they happen. So we just measure shit, and then we go, well, maybe it's because of this. Or maybe reality's like this, and that's how these crazy things happen. You know, big, crazy... And some people are criticizing theoretical physics now for not really being science anymore, because there's these things like string theory and supersymmetry.
What are they saying it is? Like philosophical mathematics?
It's closer to philosophy, exactly. So another big thing about this is that the whole...
Well, I would say the irony of that, the irony of that is that they're criticizing it for trying to bring it back to intelligibility. Because we don't need superstring theory to understand the math, but superstring theory is an effort to give us an intelligible, just like, if you could make a superstring, you could make that, you know. And so it's funny that going backwards is seen as like
now
going off the rails.
One of the important things here is this quote that's been repeated throughout since Galileo: someday we will understand how ... We know it's like this. Generally, things have to bump into each other, and someday we'll see them bumping into each other. We'll figure it out. And Newton hoped that gravity would someday be explained by mechanistic or physical processes. It never happened. Bertrand Russell in the 20th century held out the same hope for processes of chemistry. He said, well, chemical bonds, we'll eventually figure out how it's interactions between substances. And that never happened. Linus Pauling came out with the quantum mechanical origins of the chemical bond or something, which is still used as an important textbook. So the basic interactions of chemistry now are known to be based on quantum mechanical probabilities rather than mechanistic, interactions. Now,
let's throw in there too the idea that the brain creates consciousness, and someday we'll understand how.
Perfectly. Greg is psychic, because the next comment here is today's version of those two things, that hanging on to mechanistic philosophy that's been long disproven, is the theory that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. And this is something Eddie and I have debated. We've talked about several episodes. This idea given by skeptics, atheists, and what I would call materialists or physicalists. And they say all consciousness is, this whole experience we're having, all that is a byproduct or an emergent property of brain function. So the goo in your head is generating this experience. And when the goo is gone, the experience is gone, and that's the end of the story. Now, there's no proof for this. There's no evidence. But it's a theory, and it might be true. But I contend, and the importance of this whole thing that we just went through, is that I contend that it's a remnant of the mechanistic philosophy. Once again, they're saying, here's this thing, consciousness, that we don't get. Here's the thing, brain, that we can hold in our hand. The consciousness must come out of that brain somehow in some physical or scientific, some kind of empirical way, and someday we'll figure it out.
Let me just this came to mind, and it's going to be very unscientific. But when I thought about the brain and you talking about that, it being an emergent byproduct of the brain, everything else about the brain is reactionary. All the stuff it does is in reacting to the external environment and the way it's interacting with your body
and your mind.
So,
in other words, sometimes it seems that the desire comes first, and then the physical thing comes later.
Right. It's pretty intuitively simple, like Bryan's saying.
Yeah, or it's responding to changes in your body. They're like, oh, we're short on this, so we're going to break down some bone because we need some calcium. So we'll put it back in the bloodstream, and then we'll continue to regulate, but it's more of regulatory and reactionary than it is
like an organ.
Yeah.
Now, some physicalists say that, like the stomach produces bile or the liver or whatever, the brain just produces consciousness. That's the metaphor that they use, and it's an interesting theory, and but I disagree with it on a gut level. I can't prove anything. But the overall point here is that I think this whole explanation of consciousness by the skeptics and the atheist community is a remnant of the mechanistic philosophy, and therefore is flawed. And there's a reason why this mechanistic thing has stuck so long, even though being disproven a million times. And it goes back to the infant. It goes back to the human infant and the cause and effect nature that we have.
The way we're built.
The way we're built. And we're looking for it. And someday we'll find it. Just like the baby makes up a cause for that ball rolling, we're making up a cause for this consciousness, and it might be the wrong path. That's why I took this whole thing here and did this whole lecture. And now, so Chomsky's saying maybe this problem of consciousness is just way beyond anything that we are cognitively capable of. And he gave the example of rats. As we all know, rats are very smart, very, very smart. They can solve a lot of problems. They can even solve.
I had one. He solved a ton of problems.
They can solve.
I could barely contain him.
They can solve mathematical problems too. A very basic addition and subtraction. If you can teach a rat to take every second left when there's a intersection in the maze, and then you'll get to the cheese, and he can learn that, and he'll take every second left and every third right or whatever. There's a basic addition and subtraction or numbers.
Even
they
if
can
you change the maze.
Yep.
He'll still.
Oh yeah.
If you keep to
yes,
those.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
now
cool.
what they can't do is solve the prime number maze. So prime numbers are just integers that are only divisible by themselves in one. There's no other.
The simple math concepts I do get.
Yeah.
But see, and
now the rat cannot figure out the maze where you try to teach it every time you get to a turn that's a prime number, take that turn. Can't figure that out. Can't calculate primes, in other words.
Because it doesn't do math. Drop a 6-year-old in a maze where it's every other one. The 6-year-old might figure it out. It's every other one. Drop a 6-year-old in a prime number maze. There's no pattern to primes. You would have to know. I may as well say drop one. Turn every time it corresponds to a letter in the English alphabet that spells out my name. Prime numbers are an artificial thing that we've constructed. This idea of and it is a quality of these numbers, but it's also only a quality in numbers on base 10. Because if you look at similar numbers in other bases, you're going to find the similar concept of still only divisible by itself and one, but you're going to get different, places in the number line, and then.
I would argue the way I would respond to that is that the take every second left and every third right requires mathematical concepts.
But it's a pattern. It's a pattern that the rat can learn. There's no pattern to primes. There's no that's a big problem in math, that there is no true pattern to primes.
Pattern.
There's various ways you can find.
I don't know
primes.
if that's fair to say that there's no pattern.
There's no generating pattern, is what he's saying, which is definitely true. But I think there's still a pattern in the sense that.
It follows a rule.
When you look at a prime number, exactly.
When you look at a prime number,
generating primes requires you to just follow a rule.
But
so does take every left, take every third right. It's just following a rule based on numerical.
But how is the rat going to find out that rule?
Well, how
for
does
the
he
next time?
How does he find out?
Because when he finds out the second left, when he finds out, I take the second left. Then the next time he sees the second left, when he finds that first prime number, and we're going to go with 3, not 1, because obviously 1 is arguable. 3, okay? Then how's he going to figure out that 5 is the next prime, and then 7 after that? But then not till 11. How is he going to get to that step? It is beyond the rat, but I would argue if you taught a rat what prime numbers were, it would fall back into its toolbox. And I would say if I dropped you in a maze right now, and said, and in the solution to this maze is the circuit diagram of a microwave. If you know the circuit diagram of a microwave, you might solve it. But if you didn't know the circuit diagram of a microwave, you'd be like, what the fuck is this? This is random.
Eddie, you make a good point. It's a good point. But
I'm defensive of rats.
Yeah.
I'm pro-rat.
Poor little guys. What was the one from Harry Potter? Scabbers?
I think
Cute-
so.
cute
I don't know.
little guy.
My wife actually sold me on rats because I used to be like rats, and then she had we had a bunch of them when we first got together.
That's
I was
cool.
Like, they're
Very
tiny
cool.
people
Very
hands.
cool pets.
Yeah, we don't have any anymore because they die of cancer. They all die of cancer, and it happens once a year, and it's a super depressing thing. And I'm tired of digging holes in my backyard.
Yeah.
I had a rat. Dude lived almost 5 years.
Fuck you, no.
He was huge, bro. Like
Fat rat.
you can't see my hands, but that's his arms would fit right there.
Like a
That's
small
how big
football.
he was. Yeah, he was a big dude, man.
I get sad.
Yeah.
But anyway,
So, but the point is, we're agreed that there are limits to the cognition
but what's
of a rat.
So
For a rat, there are problems, and then there are mysteries.
Well, I would say that there are 2 problems with that approach, though. The first problem is to say, But the thing Chomsky says is, if you believe in evolution, you must believe in mysteries. And once you start telling other people what they must believe, you're probably an asshole.
Okay, all right.
All right, no. But
fine.
But I would argue
that
rats don't talk. Rats don't have a breadth of knowledge. Rats don't have reference books to go to.
So
rats can't go, I give up, but let me look through these books.
So
the prime numbers.
Are
What's
you
this idea?
contending with Galileo and all of them that the human capacity for cognition is infinite? Or are there problems that escape? For instance, cranial capacity is very much tied to brain power and problem-solving ability. We have a limited cranial capacity. I mean, I go beyond those limits myself. But
are you sure stretching them at least?
No. So,
but you can stand on the shoulders of giants.
And out.
Cranial capacity is related to intelligence. Since we are creatures like everything else that have evolved.
He was conflating the individual with the concept. If you stand on the shoulders of giants, you can progress. He made the argument that humans.
He's not against the ability of humans to progress in knowledge and science. He's just saying there are hard limits to certain questions.
He's talking. What he's talking about, I think, is that you can progress as much as you want in the realm of what you could call rational thought or logical thought.
Yeah.
But there's no assurance that any logical explanation will explain things like outside of looking in on the universe, the entire universe itself, and understanding what it is.
There's no guarantee that A, we'll be able to explain a phenomenon we observe, and B, that we should be able to.
Okay.
And so when we
but
approach
what's the value
everything,
in that?
The value, well, that's a good question.
I think it's valuable to say, we can solve this, let's get going.
No, but
maybe we won't.
Don't take that approach to that Chomsky's poo-pooing science. He's obviously not. He went on a long rant about all the interesting research that's being done.
Well, the value, if we want to get to some of the basic things we're talking about, is if you have a paranormal experience that you will never explain logically in your entire life, and yet it becomes meaningful.
Could still be a real thing that happened.
Yeah, it's a thing that happened to you. It's a meaningful thing. Maybe there's some sort of pattern, but you still never logically figure out exactly what's happening, and that can change the course of someone's life. Okay, great. But if you insist that you will explain it logically or it's not real, then you're just shutting yourself off for that, and you're discouraging anyone else from
Eddie,
going
let
there.
me say one more thing. One of the foundations of the philosophy that Greg and there's a lot of science in it. Tom Campbell, the physicist who briefly worked for NASA, who wrote this book, and he has many crazy claims about supernatural stuff. I'll give you that. But we have very, very deeply investigated this guy. Greg's met him, and he does not seem to be the liar or the lunatic or the guy making money, since his book is available online for free. Now, one of the very, very important things about that philosophy that Greg's been following, and me to a much lesser extent, is that he really discourages he says, don't believe me and don't believe anyone. He says, if you find it interesting, look into it. I'll give you some tips. Start with meditation. I'll give you some tips to start looking at it. But don't believe me. He's not even saying you don't have to. He's saying literally don't. Find it out yourself, and if nothing happens, go your separate way. And the really valuable thing here is that I think we too often get stuck into this whole A or B. Does it exist or does it not exist? Is it real or is it not real? And the purpose of Tom Campbell's whole system is the improvement of you. It's just getting better. It's like character development. And all these, when we wrestle with these questions of, is it real or not? Am I believing a fake pseudoscience or not? That itself is a stumbling block. It doesn't mean just believe everything now or believe any crazy theory, but it means the point of this is ego reduction, right, Craig? You have a word on that,
right, and
this is about character growth. This is about becoming a better person in a lot of ways.
And so the ego reduction actually plays directly into what we're talking about building logical models of the universe, because the ego is tied up in the intellect and logic. And so if you have just like a base awareness of what's happening around you, and you react to it in an intuitive gut level, without making any intellectual model of what's happening, that's one way of existing. Or he's basically saying that the more that you intellectualize what is coming into you and fitting it in a model, you're making it about you understanding it, and you're taking away from it, and
becomes egotistical.
It becomes egotistical, and it ends up having very real consequences in
diminishing your experience
in how you interact with other people. If you look at politics, you guys talk about politics on the show all the time. You always have these sides that go back and forth on an issue. It's because they insist that the issue is in their framework before they proceed on coming to a solution.
And it becomes a battle of egos.
And what's the funny thing is we always come down to the fact that neither one is right.
We're refusing to do that on the show. That's the point, is we're refusing to play that game.
The only thing either side's right about is that the other side's wrong.
Right.
But I do think there's a distinction here, though. There are people out there that if you say, like, I was out, I ate a mushroom, and then I saw the most beautiful thing I ever saw, a woman in white, and it was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. If someone says, you didn't see that, unless they know you're a liar, they're kind of an asshole.
Right.
You experienced that. It is not appropriate, I don't think, unless, again, you're making you're full of shit.
Right.
But it is not appropriate to diminish the experience.
Right. And so here's the thing is... So I totally agree with you on that point, and I think that skeptics tend to do that anyway. They don't exactly say that, but I mean, I'll point out earlier when we were talking about the remote viewing thing, you brought up the birthday, not paradox, but the birthday heuristic.
Actually, when I look it up, I think I look up that same way.
And so the thing is I told about a story that happened, and to me was obviously very impressive. And if you go out, you can find millions of people who have stories that to them seem personally intense and impressive, and they've already accounted for things like that. And a skeptic will come up and say, "Oh, well, it just must be these few logical fallacies." And the same thing happens with the studies. And there's no point in us going to specific studies in this during this show, but if somebody goes and does a study and finds evidence for something in psi, there could be a reason, the reason they're making it up or whatever. But why is it approached that they must be so wrong? Like,
well, no, see, because you went on a little rant, not a rant, but you expounded on the notion of egotism. And then you said they've already accounted for it, and then somebody comes and blows away their account. Well, not to be mean, your account. Now, the story itself, I saw a thing. I had this experience. No one should say you didn't have that experience.
But if the experience is unexplainable, like remote viewing an object that you could not possibly have sensed via the mechanistic philosophy or whatever we have, that must lead you to think that something.
Right now, you're doing the egotism thing. Okay. You're saying it can't be explained. I can think of a dozen explanations. But that doesn't make them so. I'm just saying, usually if you tell me something and then you imply that this is unexplainable and I can think of a mundane or relatively simple explanation, I'm not saying that's always the case, but if I can think of one, it's not ridiculous for me to go, well, but...
I want to give you something to explain to me.
Okay.
Just a simple thing.
I may not be able to.
Not to be a jerk. I just want to see you do it, honestly. So... I'm probably like 15 years old. Me and my buddy take this really strong acid. We're both hallucinating. I throw a cheese ball at him. I see like 5 cheese balls go. He dodges every single one of them, the same place I see him. How did we both see the same hallucination? Because I'm like, did you fucking dodged every one of those? And he asked me, how many did you throw? And I said, just one. But we both saw the exact same hallucination because he dodged the same cheese balls I threw.
Well, I guess you would say that you're both experiencing the same effects of the drug having a visual effect, and that they multiply
exact
objects.
Same hallucination.
Yeah.
Well, but like remember that a mundane explanation is not necessarily right. Okay.
No, I just want to see you do your thing. Man.
An explanation could be, the number you gave was 5.
Yeah, I don't remember what it was exactly.
You threw out with your an explanation. I don't even know if I really buy this as the most plausible.
And dodged all of them.
Right, but you throw out 5, right, or you throw out 1, but it looks like 5. You have 5 fingers on your hands, perhaps to both of you that magnified. That's a plausible. I'm not saying it's the case, but I'm saying it's just as plausible as saying our cognition melded. I'm not saying that you did not both experience 5, and I'm not saying that maybe you didn't both experience the same hallucination. Although I would, to a certain extent, question that a little bit if you were both fucked up when you start talking. They've done things where they videotape an exorcism, and then they interview the people involved, and they're like, they were floating off the bed and spouting Latin, and then they look at the video, it's like none of that happened. But you thought it did, and I'm not saying that the experience was real. That's what you experienced.
I have no idea that I did not throw 5 cheese balls. I know I only threw 1.
I don't ever, and it's, it is a problem of language sometimes that you can come across dismissive of the experience when what you are trying to be is dismissive of the explanation or that there isn't one. I often come back to
Greg's not saying either. He's not saying that he's not saying that there's no explanation. He's
so
just
are you
saying
saying that the explanation doesn't matter as much as the experience?
Well, he's saying that remote viewing, he believes, is possible.
If only he were sitting here so he could tell
No,
us.
I was talking about the greater philosophy behind the character development and removing ego and not trying to explain everything. Is that what the basic message is? The experience is more important than the explanation.
Right. I'm saying that there are many experiences that you could potentially shut yourself off from if you start from any place of having to put things in a certain box. And different people will have different levels where they draw that line. But I would argue that you have to be completely open in a way in order to, or you're going to be cutting something off. Because to say otherwise is to say that you do understand everything.
Especially if these abilities are tied into ego and your specific way that you think. So, for example, one of the studies I was going to send you, Eddie, was two experimenters who did the random thing where the subjects try to change the random number generator and make it go up or make it go down. And both of them had already done experiments, and the skeptic found no results, and the other person, the believer person, found some small but statistically significant results. So they got together and did it again, and they both did different sessions, and the same thing happened. The skeptic got nothing, the other guy got something. So maybe the other guy, the believer guy, had a methodological mistake. Maybe there was fraud in the experiment. But
and I can confirm that in all the crazy stuff that's happened, there's a very strong connection seemingly between me being open to something then happening and then it being able to happen.
Right.
And that is
which
not
might be hobbling the skeptical community because they're approaching it from that cynical, masturbating in the marketplace viewpoint.
But the problem with that is that's the
Like
old,
the guy
you
who
have
can't
to
find love,
Yeah.
but he ain't really open to it.
Yeah.
I always say, like, if you want to find love, you better be open to it.
Yeah.
Because if you're all jaded, like men are this or women are that, and you all you do is shake your masculine sword, or that like all men are pigs, the patriarchy's ruined us all. Fuck you guys. Like you're not gonna find it with a man or a woman if you're.
Yep.
That's a really great
It
analogy.
But there's a problem of saying you have to believe before you can believe.
We didn't say
But
that.
see
though.
that's
You have to be open
said
to
open.
believing.
I'm glad you said that because there is a huge difference between believing before it happens and
Which could fuck you up just as much.
and not believing did I say the right double negative?
No,
but not believing it,
well, believing
Not
that it
discipline.
can't happen.
not discipline. There you go.
Coming into it believing that this can't be real, that would hobble you. But also coming in believing that crystals are making this happen, that might hobble you because you're believing again. And both are beliefs. So Campbell's whole approach is don't go either way. That's the beauty of the open-minded skepticism thing. Don't go in believing there's ghosts, there's crystals, and I can teleport. Don't go in like that because it'll fuck you up. Just like if you go in going, this is bullshit, this can't happen. And I think all Greg is saying is that he believes remote viewing, which has a definition, is possible. People that are far from an object can sense the properties of that object.
But at a certain,
sometimes.
But I would say that you're starting to introduce more and more variables.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is, if something is real, in principle, it shouldn't matter whether or not I believe in it or not, or even if I'm like, this is horseshit, you should be able to present me with enough.
Well, I just don't know how strong that principle is.
Right. No. And so what I would argue is this, though. It is possible, and I certainly buy it. I mean, the Force doesn't work if you don't believe in it.
Right.
I don't have a problem with the idea even of you have to have that to get it. Like that, if you just think this is horseshit, it'll never work for you. I actually don't fundamentally have a problem with that. The problem I have with it, though, is that the people who do have that, will say open-mindedness or belief, either way, really, even going the other way, should be able to okay, fine, we'll do all the things you want us to do, even though we think it's real. We'll do all these things and show you it's real. But they never can do that. There's never a controlled study that actually shows good data that is replicable.
Right.
And it's not vastly different than saying, I think prayer cures people. Really? It seems to only cure the people that have diseases that can be cured.
You're right. You're right. There are individual studies that do show results. I think you admit that, but replicating them does become a problem. And they've tried, and they They publish those results and they say we couldn't replicate it. But here's why we're trying to figure out why.
You have to do it a trillion more times.
But one of the reasons is a lot in those. If there's 30 subjects, a lot of times there's 2 guys or women that are extremely good at it, and for a couple times, and they're the ones that lift the statistical significance above 0, and then the other people get null results or less than. And so replicating it, if it has to do with individual skill, that's going to be a huge problem for controlled studies. Because if you, Eddie, are demanding 1,000 subjects be in this, or 10,000 subjects, make it even stronger, you might be weakening the results, because it might be only some of 3 people in that group who can do it.
And that's true. And you know what? I would love it if the hardcore skeptics and the hardcore woo people got together with someone that they could kind of both agree was relatively neutral to try to do this, because I actually find that 100% plausible. Like, in terms of if I accept certain premises and say, if I accept as a premise that, you can go outside your mind or whatever, then I can certainly believe that some people would be better at it than others. I mean, that seems transparent.
And there's a...
no one can blame you for wanting proof.
Right. No, yeah, I don't blame you at all. I mean, the thing is that if you haven't seen any of this stuff happen, you shouldn't believe it. But... what I found really interesting, even for myself, I keep asking myself the question, but what do I still believe without even knowing it? Or what do I disbelieve without even knowing it? And how does that affect anything? And it's a big question. I wanted to bring up one study, though, that did you look at the studies I emailed John at all?
No, I didn't.
I wasn't cool enough to get the studies.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't get any of it, so don't feel bad, bro. I get nothing.
Honestly, I
But
didn't.
I'm a dick about it.
I
didn't
do the study because they were a little over my head, and it was going to be too much for a podcast to get into the methodology.
It's a lot of material. It's a lot of stuff. But there was one I sent that was replicated in a. So I don't know if you know who Dean Rodin is, but he does a lot of experiments related to this kind of stuff.
Is it spelled like the thinker?
Radin.
Yeah.
And he came up with this experiment. He comes up with a lot of he calls it pre-sentiment, where you can feel something before it happens. And the way the experiment goes is they have standard stock images used in psychology, where some of them are very emotional and some aren't. And they have you're just sitting in front of a screen, and a computer randomly selects what image will show up next. And then, meantime, they're recording. I think they use mainly like iris dilation, and
sometimes skin conductivity,
stuff
too.
like that's very sensitive to emotional response. And so they take all that data, flash a bunch of images, and then they analyze the data, and they find that people are reacting before the image is even selected, even selected in the random number generator.
And I would love to see that.
And so the reason I bring it up is not to just say, hey, here's another study, but the reason I bring it up is because we were talking about remote viewing and it being ruined by people believing or not. And this one seems to be easily replicable, and it could be because they're experimenting on something that's very automatic. And so if humans have an automatic pre-sentiment, even if it's just a little bit, you can't really seem to shut it down. I mean, a lot of people have stories about going into a dangerous area and about to be attacked from behind, and they react quickly. It seems like you can't really turn that off.
And I'll tell you, man, anybody who's good at psych, especially inpatient psych, has that going on.
And soldiers.
Because you could walk onto that unit at any day and be like, something's not right. It's things.
There's a German word, and I'm not sure if the right one is Gestalt or Zeitgeist. And I don't think either one's quite right, but I know there's got to be a German word for it. They got a word for everything.
Oh, no, it's not either of those, but it's like...
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's something Gans something.
What's the word?
The idea is basically, it's almost like, to oversimplify would be to say it's almost like a pattern recognition.
Yeah.
It would be to say, like, the next one will likely be this because of the circumstances I'm in, and the people around me, and the way it's not so much a sense of like ESP,
right? But
it also might be. An interesting stuff about quantum mechanics is the possibility of effects moving backward through time, and that's one of the theories explaining that whole thing is that effects moving. The effects can move forward and backward in time might be another explanation for that.
Sure.
And so what I would argue...
Time might not be linear.
I want to see if this stuff is real. The first step is reproducing it, and then the second step is trying to, and maybe you won't ever, but trying to find out maybe what could be causing it. Because when you, like remote viewing, there's an old magic trick. And, if you say, oh, Swami, what number do I have? Then it's an even number. But if he says... what number's here, then it's an odd number, and not all of that is conscious. So it is like, first I have to buy that this is happening more than chance, more than just if you just arbitrarily did it. After I buy that, I'm going to start wanting to look, and I'm going to default, personally, me as the resident asshole, I'm going to default to the more mundane explanation that there's something like that there. But I'm going to say, we don't know yet. Step 1 was proving it's a thing. Step 2 is trying to rule things out to try to figure out what it could be. Because it could be. I don't automatically disbelieve in weird shit. I like weird shit. Weird shit is cool. But I want to see it, and but there's a gut check because
we're all on that same page. I mean, that study was on that page. There's like, well, how did they react before the image came up? Let's think about this. Maybe it was that the computer chose the image first, and then the reaction came because somehow the computer signaled what it was going to do. Maybe there was a delay, and they ruled that out. And so
I'd have to see the study. I mean, not to be a smartass. I just because there's a million things that can go wrong, and that's the big thing.
The other one was related too. The one I mentioned with the 2 experimenters was the sense of being stared at. It was someone in another part of the building concentrating on the video feed of the subject, and then they were just measuring conductivity on the skin. And that the one experimenter found positive results, that the people had some kind of electrochemical reaction to being looked at.
Right.
And the other person found that they didn't.
And that was Rupert Sheldrake who worked on that stuff, I think. And this is totally anecdotal, but I'll just throw it in here for entertainment purposes. But he was saying when he would talk to snipers, they would report that to a lot of the time when they're going to take out a target, that the target would right when they're about to be shot, turn and look directly at them from a long distance. Yeah. And there's also an anecdotal story that in like spy training or whatever, they tell them when you're following somebody like on the street or whatever, like don't look at them because you're gonna yeah. So that's just anecdotal.
It's just fun stuff.
And but I agree with Eddie's that I would feel the same way. I would make the same statements that Eddie's making. It's not that I'm disagreeing with like words that are coming out of his mouth, but the thing that we're trying to dig at here is like, can you have like a an attitude that you have that explanation and you need the explanation, and therefore it's just totally shut off to you somehow.
That's the thing, Eddie, because
or at least certain doors are closed.
Right.
Yeah, there's certain doors that you're not even going to look at. You're not even going to check them to see if they're open.
Because am I right to assume that, Eddie, you wouldn't sit down to try this? You might try it sort of for a minute, but you wouldn't really go into it like, man, I really want to do this, and let's hope I'm going to work on meditation.
What, like
you would never
like the years I spent meditating and learning about Zen Buddhism? Yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't do that. I definitely totally didn't do that.
Right, but trying remote viewing in your current state as you are now. I'm not talking about you in 1973. I'm talking about you now. And
when I was negative 11.
The point being that the attitude the attitude which you have, which seems it is very rational, and it's very fair too. I have to say, you've always been fair on this show, but it might. And with Greg, for example, I look up to Greg in terms of character. I view him as a calm, thoughtful person. He never does anything crazy. I mean, I'm better than him at jiu-jitsu, but that's it. And but the point is, like, I think there's character benefits to what he's doing, and that's what really attracts me to the Tom Campbell thing, is this idea of improving the quality of consciousness. That's a phrase that he repeats very often. And I love how he discourages belief. He doesn't want you to enter it by believing.
At the risk of being a smartass, though, I mean, this is all shit that the Buddha talked about centuries ago.
Well, maybe that's just more in its favor.
No.
Greg is deep into Buddhism.
It totally is, though. I mean, the more that I learn about any of this stuff, the more that every religion looks the same, especially the quote-unquote mystical aspects of any religion, some of which are more mystical than others, with all the Buddhist monks and all that. And, Campbell's stuff is using modern... he uses like technology metaphors and stuff like that, but he's essentially talking about the same thing.
Yeah, and he notes the similarities between his thing and the other thing.
And so you ask if I would, pursue these things, and I mean, I would argue I have and have never gotten a result.
Me neither.
I've gotten things that were weird or strange, but I've always looked at them and tried to step back from that gut check of like, oh, it's amazing, and say, okay, that was an experience. Something happened. Is it not Does it step outside my understanding of things right now?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then I'm going to say, well, then it probably doesn't.
And see where it's a bit of a paradox here, because the thing is that for me to change anybody's mind to any significant large degree, they would have to be making a belief jump, which I don't want anyone to do.
Or having an experience that they could relate to what you were.
But I'm just talking about like
if
I'm
me
just
and
talking about
Eddie
the
tried
purpose.
remote viewing and then it fucking worked for some reason. Like we kept nailing it.
Right. But yeah, and that's, yeah, you bring up a good point. So I'm talking about the purpose of me even coming and discussing this is that I don't even think I'm going to change Eddie's mind. I don't even necessarily think his mind should change, because that would mean that in a few words, like
he'd be believing
he would jump to a different belief.
Yeah.
And also I'm sure that Eddie is improving himself as a person anyways. So as we're, touting that this stuff leads to personal development, it's not that I think that other people aren't developing.
Good point.
So it's a bit paradoxical, but I think this stuff gets put out there because if you do happen to have an experience, then all of a sudden you might think, oh, wow. Or if you do just want to try it a little bit, maybe you'll have an experience. Some people will, some people won't. But I think that it's to talk about this stuff openly is not crazy. And there's tons and tons of
That's funny. When you were talking, I was thinking, and if you can feel that way and have experiences and leave not feeling like your helmet is bent, it's a good thing.
And the point of the Chomsky summary was that the standards for what is considered intelligible and possible have loosened over time rather than narrowed. And I think that's important. And what might be called for is a further loosening. That was the point I was trying to make, was what might be called for now when we have millions of anecdotal cases of near-death experiences and remote viewing and things like that. What might be called for is a loosening of the standards for intelligibility, which just opens things up a little more, and a reduction of ego from both sides.
But a reduction of intelligibility.
It sounded like you were talking about advancing in jiu-jitsu for a second.
The reduction of intelligibility does not mean a loosening of evidentiary standards. Okay?
Yeah.
Every near-death experience, there's never, ever been a documented case of a near-death experience where an information that could not have been known except by someone who was out of their body, or whatever specific flavor of NDE you're talking about, happened.
I don't know how
never.
you can
There's
say that with
documented cases, but the plural of anecdote is not data.
Right.
We have a story about a guy who walked on water. Doesn't mean he did.
Right.
Now here's the thing too, is that
I saw Chris Angel do it he was at in Vegas. He did it. He walked on water.
Now to get back though to the if developing character is something that's important enough. I don't know if you've seen the Pin von Lommel study on near-death experience, and he would disagree with you about things happening that couldn't be. But even aside from that, if we just let that go, they do these polls where people who have cardiac arrest. So that's the group we're taking, the ones that have near-death experiences, and then are polled later about how they subjectively feel that compassion has increased in their life, how that relationships with people have improved, stuff like that. The near-death experience is very helpful to them. So it doesn't even matter if it's total garbage. If you can have some meditation experiences that replicate some of that, why would not everybody not be trying to do it?
Yeah, and it's yeah. And the statement that it's never...
So the ends justify the means?
I think what you mean to say, Eddie, is
I like
that
to break it down for the layman listener.
It's never been documented under controlled experimental circumstances. Of course, there have been people who say, I found this thing that I couldn't have known. And same with the children who report memories from their past life, and then the facts turn out to be true, historical facts that they couldn't have known. I mean, they could all be lying. They could.
That could have all been in the evidence
that
was destroyed at Auschwitz.
It's not always lying.
It is evidence, though, Eddie. You might dispute the quality of the evidence, but anecdotal evidence is evidence. And I think that's important to remember. If someone you know and trust tells you that something happened, I think it's important. And just like the rape case, rape case, I think it's important to hold back your thing and not your ego, and try not to think of all the times this person has been wrong and been like, they're just wrong. Like, it's important to take anecdotal evidence as a weak form of evidence.
Yeah, and especially when it piles up. I'm glad, because we were going to bring that up. I was talking about how this all jives with old religions in India. 3,000 years ago, I don't even know how many thousands of years ago. You have methods of meditation where guys would go out and meditate, and things would happen like remote viewing. And for thousands and thousands of years, monks do this and describe the same sequence of progression.
There's a government program
of states of mind and
Operation
doing
Stargate.
it. Yeah, there's governments going out and
The
doing
one that
it.
got shut down for finding no results?
There's millions of people
didn't find
having
no
subjective
results.
experiences. Like
It
this
found no
piles
military
up quite a
application.
bit.
It did find results.
But the
It didn't
pile...
find-
Okay, there's a saying, and it's slightly off, and so you'll have to forgive me, but it is a saying. The plural of anecdote is not data. If people are doing shitty science, you can have 1,000 people doing shitty science, and they're going to come up with the same answer that they were looking for that they like, but they're all doing shitty science. I think, eating organic cured my cancer. Well, the eating organic didn't cure the cancer are all dead, and the other ones go, I also got chemo, but I don't, it's not the chemo, it's the eating organic.
But everyone who did experience something, let's say they
had
experienced
an
something
experience.
real.
They had an
Let's
experience.
just pretend it was real. And the skeptical approach might result in a case like the rape case, where they later determine that it didn't really happen. That can happen too, Eddie. So I can have an experience and then later determine it was angels, or I can also go the oppositely but equally wrong direction of saying, no, I didn't have it at all. I was asleep, or I made it up even. So the skeptical thing can also push you to the wrong conclusion. Remember that. So you must concede that there is such a thing as too much skepticism sometimes.
Every approach can lead to the wrong answer.
Right.
But the only one that consistently gets us to the correct answer, or to good answers, to answers that can be replicated that other people can use, is the approach of
scientific.
But that approach of, how could I be wrong? I'm going to try to rule out any way I could be wrong. The woo concept, and I'm not saying that's what either one of you were doing, but the woo concept of taking anecdote that's how you get fucking folk medicine and think that rhino horn gives you a boner.
Right. That's true.
Sure.
Yep. Rhino horn
And
doesn't
the
give you a
difference
boner.
is the
Brian's been buying rhino horn for years.
The difference is when, there's a lot of medicines that, initial results maybe were skewed by the medical comment, but as they do more, doctors they look at the research and they go, actually, you know what? It doesn't look like this is doing shit, right? Especially with psych drugs and stuff. But rhino horn, they'll go, yeah, but there's those anecdotes. It's totally legit.
No one said to conclude
I'm not
by
saying you
anecdotes
did.
that it's totally legit.
No, I know. I didn't. I tried to be careful.
And I would say too that coming to the conclusion that rhino horn does whatever it's supposed to do is the same, fundamentally the same thing that happens if you go back to the 50s and say this drug does whatever it's supposed to do, and we know now that it just doesn't.
And how do we know that?
So how many things exist today that are within this framework of science that don't work either? They're just like rhino horns.
Science.
But Eddie's just saying pile up the evidence and do the experiments until you can know for sure.
Science is a process of trying to show something isn't there. Really, it's an effort. It rarely comes up with a true answer. It comes up with an answer that you haven't falsified yet.
Yeah, but then you get lots of synthetic rhino horn in the process.
I do.
Koala chlamydia.
I wasn't able to research this enough, Eddie, but I thought you'd find it interesting. The whole falsifiability makes it a scientific theory. That was Karl Popper came up with that in probably the 20s, 30s. And
he had a lot of penguins, in case you didn't know. Mr. Popper.
I don't get it.
The movie, God. Mr. Popper's Penguins? Nothing? All right,
Never even heard of
it. It
that.
was not about Karl Popper. Go on. Bad joke.
This article I read was that physics, some physicists, some scientists are moving away from the Popperian falsifiability requirement and towards the Bayesian probability evaluation of a scientific theory. So it's not falsifiability. That's not necessarily written in stone. That was Karl Popper's idea. And there's another approach, which is I didn't read enough to be able to explain it very well. You probably know more about Bayesian statistical analysis than I do, but it's being more and more accepted as a better approach. And that's another sign of the loosening of intelligibility standards. So falsifiability, like string theory, can't be falsified. So a lot of people say it's not a theory.
The concept of falsifiability is, as you noted, it's largely a Popperian thing. It's and this idea of black and white, true or false, must be falsifiable, does not take into account things that are statistically based. And so Bayesian, but fundamentally, if you're going to say 60% of the population, can do X, if it's 1%, you're wrong.
Right.
So no matter how much Bayesian analysis you apply, your theory is wrong.
This applies more to large scale theoretical physics theories, yeah.
But nonetheless, there's still this idea of true or false. And the falsifiability thing, we can play with the terms of that. But the basic concept is to look at something and say, what do I think this is?
But the question is,
and am I right or wrong? And how do I find out whether I'm right or wrong?
You're right, but the question is important because of stuff like string theory. Should that be taken seriously? I mean, it's not falsifiable based on current technology.
Right.
So should we talk about it at all?
And
older generation might have said, no, it's not falsifiable. It's not science. But now we sort of we wheel and deal in those type of things, like Einstein's metaphor of space-time.
But the big problem with string theory is that it's backwards.
Well, let's
No. It takes the math and it works with what we do know, and it has yet to make a prediction that we can compare it against.
Right.
Right?
What were you going to say, Greg?
I was saying that, yeah, in this idea of falsifiability worked a lot better before we bumped up against where we are at science now, which is, like with simulation theory, the reason this theory has even come about in the first place is because there seems to be things in science that we're bumping up against. In quantum physics, we might not be able to go smaller. We might not be able to determine why a quantum event happens. It just happens. And so if we are really there and we're not going to get past it, then the theories that explain why those things happen really can't be falsifiable.
Give me an example of a quantum event.
Nuclear decay.
Go ahead.
The original quantum idea was Schrodinger's cat. We've talked about it before on the show, but I'll give it a little longer explanation. When nuclear elements decay, they decay into basically other elements. They
at
lose
a steady rate.
At a steady rate. But which one it is, so you've got a chunk and it's got 1 million atoms, right? Mm-hmm. And at a steady rate, I'm making an atom, 1 a second is going to decay into a different atom. At the end of this, it's going to be that it's all whatever the fuck the next one down. Okay, and when we talk about half-lives, because the math is very interesting, any given chunk has a half-life. If I have a 10-pound chunk, its half-life is the same as a 5-pound chunk, which means that the two in one chunk's time, 5 pounds will disappear and turn to the other element. On the other chunk,
50%,
2.5 will disappear. So that math is weird. But then when you're looking at individual atoms in there, there's no way to go, well, it's going to be that atom, then that atom, then that atom. When you look at other things like crystallization, you can usually say what the seed crystal is going to be and
so
how
what
it
you're saying
propagates.
is there's no way to predict which atom it's going to be. No way to predict that quantum
that we
event.
know of. I mean,
Okay.
for all we know, we could find something else. But.
Another one being this double slit experiment where they're able to fire single particles at a screen, and when they observe, when they watch it happen, when they have a detector on the screen, the particle just hits somewhere on the screen.
Well, there's two detectors. So you've got the emitter, something in the middle. It's got 2 holes in it, and then some at the end. The thing at the end is always detecting. The thing in the middle, if you put a detector there, they go through one or the other.
So if you put a detector in the middle, and you're not interfering with the thing at all physically, it fires the particle, hits the screen, and you can see exactly where it hit.
It either went through the top or the bottom.
There's 2 slits that it's going through. It's firing through a piece of paper with 2 holes in it, and then the screen is back here. Then when you have the detector here also, it goes through one of those 2 slits, and you can just say it went through the left one. There it is. When you take this detector away, what you don't get single things hitting the wall anymore. You get a disruption pattern. What's it called? A probability pattern. An interference pattern. And so it no longer acts as a single particle, because the whole question was, are particles or are they waves? And the fact is they're both. And they're one or the other.
Well, they behave as both because we still don't fucking fully understand it.
They behave as both depending on our observation of them. And that's fucking crazy.
Not our looking at them, just to be clear. Not our looking at them, but
our measurement.
At what point it's forced, if you will, by some kind of measurement or observation, at what point it's forced to have done a thing. If you don't force it to have essentially made a decision until it hits the last screen, then
it won't make a decision.
Then there's a problem there. It won't make a decision, and that's part of what...
Anybody listening can go look up the delayed erasure experiments.
Yeah.
And that's way too complicated to try to explain right now, but it's interesting to go read about.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
And it seems to support the idea that no matter what you're actually doing at those slits, like Eddie's saying, it doesn't matter what you're doing there. It matters if the data is going to be measured or understood. I would say understood by a consciousness or perceived by a consciousness.
But see, that's something that comes up a lot, and I would strongly disagree, because you do not have to look at that detector to get that result. You could say, I'm going to ignore that detector completely, and you'll still get that same end result.
So we should get into this, because in Campbell's theories and my own is this idea that with physical say like physical scientific instruments or purely physical means, you will forever run up against this quantum stuff and not be able to explain how it's happening. And yet consciousness does come from like at least one level of reality above that. And so, but being a consciousness, you can use your consciousness to understand that. And that's another reason why these mystics, start getting into these experiences being important, because you have to have your subjective consciousness, transcendent experiences to understand reality on a certain level, because you never will with physical means. Mm-hmm. And
the measurement apparatus, in other words, and that's just relativity as well. The measurement apparatus affects the result.
Can we get into why you disagree with that? Going back to the double slit.
Eddie, your
consciousness is not necessary.
Okay, so can you explain that?
To collapse, it's a common thing. It was in What the Bleep Do We Know, and it's just not true. Like, consciousness is not necessary. What's necessary is something that forces it. When there's one hole or another, there's nothing really doing anything. But when something is detecting it, I could ignore that detector. My consciousness is not involved in that. It could be some kind of natural detector that somehow fucking grew on there. It wouldn't matter. What matters is that something's detecting it going through the slits. So your consciousness. My point is that the consciousness is not the involved part.
Right. So you're talking about the concept of collapsing the waveform. In other words, without a direct. So the thing is though is that it doesn't really. You're right.
How can it be true that it acts as a particle, even if we don't check it to see if it acted like a particle?
No. So at the end is the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. And either we will see two dots, one left hole, right hole. Or we will see a wave interference pattern, which looks like it's like 6 dots. It's because the idea is when you have two waves, the peaks add to each other, the crests reduce from each other,
like
and
two waves in a pool will merge, and then
yeah. So at the end of that screen, it doesn't matter whether we're looking at the detector, which is the thing we know. If you put it there, something happens. If you take it away, something happens. Like you get two different results depending whether the detector is there or not. Our consciousness is not involved in that change. Now you notice at the end the detector, but we don't even have to be detecting that. The original Schrodinger's cat experiment had a hammer and a glass. There was no person involved. Now it was a thought experiment, so it's not real. No one actually put a cat in a box. But the point is that everyone likes to think that the consciousness is involved because of the term observed.
Now I know what you're saying. And you I don't think you've said anything wrong, but the reason it doesn't dispute the theory that I put forth is because we do have this idea of collapsing the waveform, and I'm not saying that somebody ever has to perceive the data exactly. You don't have to get a list of left right on the double slit experiment, but we know that if you build things in such a certain way that you're perceiving some effect of it going through one slit or the other, that it collapses the waveform. Like for example, if you were to build a double slit experiment and there's some sort of switch where if it goes through the left slit, you're feeding a tiny amount of thermodynamic energy into some block somewhere, and if it goes through the right one, you're taking away some thermodynamic energy. You will collapse the waveform. I mean, I think they've done experiments like this, maybe not the exact one. You will never have the left right of the individual particles going through there, but you're looking at the block. And so the block is something that's being perceived and it's being affected by those going through there. So that there's ways.
Eddie, it seems like you're on thin ice because you can never say that a result will happen without us observing that result ever. Doesn't make sense.
But the idea of
there's always
consciousness is not involved in collapsing the wave function, because if it was, it would matter whether we were observing the results of the detector at the slit. It doesn't. We don't have to pay any attention to that.
How do we know that?
What I'm saying is that there's like a chain of it's like a chain of custody almost.
No, it's not though,
because there's something somewhere, and we can maybe delve into specific experience. But I'm saying that every experiment that I've looked at that's trying to support what you're claiming, there is some sort of chain where consciousness is observing something that is connected to.
Okay. But no, stop. There's two detectors. There's one in the middle, one at the end. It doesn't matter whether we do literally anything with that middle one. We could ignore it completely and have no conscious perception of it. If it's there, just if it's there, not if we're doing anything with it, no results, no changes or anything. At the end of the screen, we'll get the two patterns, one, left, right. If it
doesn't make sense to say that they're there if we never check to see if they're there.
Hold on, though. If you take away that middle detector, you will get the wave interference pattern. Okay? Doesn't matter whether you're looking at the middle screen. The variable is the detector. not consciousness. You have the same amount of consciousness either way. In both cases, you're ignoring the middle screen.
So Eddie, this is where I'm arguing that you can collapse the waveform without having a direct left right list, because if you have a detector there, again, according to the laws of thermodynamics or something, that detector has some electrical impulse that goes along some wire that's increasing the temperature of the room you're in. Now, that's the reason why I brought up the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, because it's truly doing things in such a way where you have a detector and yet you're completely erasing the information from reality. And in that experiment, I would argue supports my view.
We'll show you that paper. I saw that too. It's
the point I'm just making is that the consciousness is not necessary to get the two different results. You get two different results that have no impact. You could put the detector in a cooler. I mean, you can.
So the mystery then reduces to why the waveform collapses in the presence of a detector
of something that kind of makes it collapse. And I think, and I actually could be wrong. I do think consciousness can collapse the wave function. I'm just saying it's not necessary. It's just you could have a fucking mindless detector, or you could have a person. It doesn't matter.
And so Tom Campbell himself, when I talked to him, supposedly the project he's working on now is specifically coming up with more experiments that should provide some falsifiability to how he's saying it works, and going into this direct debate. So I think that there actually is potential for some experiments coming up in the coming years that should shed some more light on this.
I mean, to a certain extent, it's similar to the hard problem of solipsism. Of removing yourself from an equation.
Right,
you can never quite do it.
Yeah. That's what I meant. Yeah. That's what I was getting. I might be confused, but my approach was you'll never know if it collapsed unless you check something.
Well, the problem at the end, though, the problem with the final detector is either it collapsed with left or right, or it collapsed with a wave interference pattern. I mean, one way or another, it collapsed in some meaningful way. And so my point was, your involvement in the middle doesn't matter. And so your consciousness doesn't matter, because you can get either one that looks collapsed or one that looks uncollapsed, because your consciousness didn't impact.
Greg, you're talking about the two squares thing that Campbell showed, right? With that other experiment with the mirrors, or not?
Oh yeah. The diagram looks like two rectangulars attached by a corner, because you should look at it. It's really interesting because he tries to get deeper into at what point do they decide, and he finds the result of the discovery. He didn't find it. It was big science. They found that the particle will decide which route to take when it's being a particle, and then when you do something at the end, it goes back in time and has acted as a wave the whole time.
It's weird shit. And
super
you know what?
Weird.
I don't find it impossible to believe that consciousness is necessary in some way to collapse a wave function. I find it plausible conceptually, just like that concept that, we've got, essentially random noise, and then the noise kind of these probability waves kind of cohese to a point where consciousness exists probabilistically enough to suddenly collapse the whole thing. It's not impossible, but I want to see some evidence.
Fair enough, my man. All right, we went too long, guys. Brian, what do you think about all this shit?
It's the most interesting thing I've heard all week.
Nice.
Like I enjoyed it.
I don't think it's wise to go any longer, so we might have to save. You have a trove of really good anger managements. The one in Germany.
Oh, that was bad, man.
We'll do that.
That's a 10.0 on the Richter scale. There.
Yeah, that got rough.
That was a deal breaker, life changer.
We will hit you guys with that next week. So thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope it wasn't too dense. I think we made sense of it all, and we came to a nice radical agnostic conclusion, which is the whole point. So thank you, Greg, for coming back, man, and explaining your experiences.
Thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Yeah, I like the way you talk.
And thanks, Eddie, for approaching it with your usual vigor and
killjoyness.
I like the way you talk, too.
Ghosts.
Eddie's a fun skeptic to talk to.
Yeah,
thank you for that, Eddie.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Not like Sam Harris. The end.
No, I like that. I like that about Eddie.
Most of the new atheists are kind of assholes.
Yeah,
well, you got to respect, man. It goes a long way to a decent discussion.
What?
Was it Will Wheaton's one rule of atheism?
What?
Don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. You got to have respect, and I think like those guys are kind of dicks. And
ego.
You rub people the wrong way if you're a dick. It doesn't matter if you're right.
Yeah.
Like people still don't want to hear it because of the way you're delivering your message.
All right. Well, hope everyone had a good holiday, and New Year's coming up, and episode 43 coming up in the new effing year. I'm very excited. We're going to keep doing this. Bye-bye.